Tonight, we will go on a journey to free your mind, not by running faster toward happiness, but by learning how to slow down. How does one cultivate a mind that naturally inclines toward peace, toward appreciation, toward seeing the light even in dark places? The answer, as you will discover, has little to do with effort and everything to do with stillness. It is not something you must force into being. It is something you uncover, like removing clouds to reveal a sun that was shining all along. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The Buddha once said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." In the teachings that follow, we will explore what this truly means. We will walk slowly together, and in that slowness, discover what has been waiting for us all along. Take a slow, deep breath. Let's begin our journey together. We live in a world that constantly tells us how we should feel. When tragedy strikes, we are told to stay strong. When anxiety grips us, we are told to relax. When sadness settles into our bones, we are told to cheer up. And perhaps most frequently of all, when life becomes difficult, we are told to be positive. This instruction, though offered with kindness, often lands like a stone in our hearts. Because there is a vast distance between understanding that positivity helps and actually feeling positive. The instruction assumes that attitude is a choice, like selecting an item from a menu. I will have the positive outlook today, please. But anyone who has struggled knows that the mind does not work this way. You cannot simply flip a switch and illuminate a dark room within yourself. And so we find ourselves in a strange predicament. We know, intellectually, that people with positive attitudes tend to heal faster, cope better, and find more joy in ordinary moments. Studies have confirmed this again and again. A positive mind is correlated with better outcomes in illness, in grief, in the countless challenges that life presents. This knowledge is everywhere. It surrounds us like water surrounds a fish. And yet, for many people, it remains entirely out of reach. The problem is not with the destination. The problem is that no one has shown us the path. When someone tells you to be positive and you cannot manage it, you feel worse than before. Now you have your original suffering, plus the added suffering of failing at the supposedly simple task of adjusting your attitude. You become frustrated with yourself. You wonder what is wrong with you that everyone else seems to manage what you cannot. The instruction that was meant to help has become another weight to carry. This is not a failure of willpower. This is not a character flaw. This is simply the result of trying to force something that cannot be forced. Positivity, genuine positivity, does not come from effort. It does not come from determination or discipline or repeating affirmations in the mirror. It comes from something else entirely. Something simpler, and yet something that our busy modern lives have made increasingly rare. It comes from stillness. The Buddha taught that within each of us, there is already a natural state of peace and clarity. We do not need to create it. We do not need to import it from somewhere else. We only need to stop obscuring it. Like a lake that becomes clear when the mud settles, the mind becomes peaceful when we stop stirring it. But what does this actually mean? How does one stop stirring the mind? And how does stillness translate into the positive attitude we have been seeking? Let us explore a story that illuminates this beautifully. There is a story about a monk who spent many years living in a monastery nestled in the hills of the countryside. The monastery sat at the top of a gentle slope, surrounded by native bushland, rocks weathered by time, and the quiet presence of trees that had stood for generations. For nearly a decade, the monk traveled up and down that hill countless times, always in a vehicle, always looking through the window of a car as the landscape scrolled past. He knew that road well, or at least, he believed he did. One morning in spring, everything changed. The monk had been away attending to some duty in the nearby town. It was one of those perfect mornings that seem to exist outside of ordinary time. The air was warm but not hot. The sky held that particular quality of light that makes everything seem gentle and new. As the car approached the base of the hill, the monk felt something stir within him. Perhaps it was the beauty of the morning. Perhaps it was the unusual sense of spaciousness in his schedule. Perhaps it was simply that the conditions were right for something to shift. "Stop here," he said to the driver. "I will walk the rest of the way." This was not for exercise. This was not for any particular purpose at all. It was simply that the morning was too beautiful to experience from behind glass, and there was nowhere he urgently needed to be. So he stepped out of the car and began to walk. What happened next surprised him deeply. As he took his first steps along the familiar road, he looked around and experienced a profound disorientation. For a moment, he genuinely did not recognize where he was. This was impossible, of course. He had traveled this road hundreds of times. He knew every turn, every landmark, every stretch of it. And yet, looking around him now, he felt as if he had never seen this place before. The hillside looked completely different from what he remembered. Not slightly different, completely different. The landscape he thought he knew had transformed into something strange and new. He saw things he had never noticed, details that had somehow remained invisible to him through all those years of passing by. The road he thought was so familiar was revealing itself to be a place he had never truly visited at all. This is worth pausing to consider. How is it possible to travel the same path for years and never see it? How can we move through spaces day after day and remain blind to what is right in front of us? The monk was confronting something profound about the nature of perception itself. And as he would soon understand, this was not merely about a hillside. This was about life. He continued walking, slowly, and as he walked, he began to notice what had changed. The road was the same road. The trees were the same trees. The rocks had not moved. Nothing external was different. What had changed was the quality of his seeing. When he had looked through the window of a car, everything had passed in a blur of general impressions. Trees, rocks, bushes. The categories were there, but the things themselves were absent. Now, walking slowly, he began to see particulars. This rock, with its specific shape, its grey surface interrupted by patches of orange and green lichen. That tree, with bark that was not simply brown but an intricate pattern of ridges and furrows, a texture that seemed almost alive. Small flowers he had never noticed, tucked between stones. The way the morning light fell differently on different leaves, creating a symphony of greens he could not have imagined. There was more information here than he had ever perceived. More detail, more depth, and something else, something unexpected. More beauty. The monk had made an assumption without realizing it. He had assumed that he knew what the hillside looked like because he had looked at it so many times. But looking at something is not the same as seeing it. And in all those years of looking, he had never truly seen. Then, moved by the strangeness and wonder of this experience, he stopped walking altogether. He simply stood still, and the hillside changed again. It was as if reality itself was unfolding before him. The colors deepened, the details sharpened. What had been beautiful became exquisite. Standing there, with nowhere to go and nothing to do, he felt as if he was seeing the world for the first time. The greens were not merely green but alive with variation and depth. The rocks were not merely rocks but sculptures shaped by millennia, each one unique, each one worthy of contemplation. The bark of the trees, which he had never given a moment's thought, revealed itself as a landscape in miniature, intricate and endlessly fascinating. This was not a hallucination. This was not a mystical experience in the conventional sense. This was simply what happens when we give our senses the time they need to fully receive what is being offered. And the monk, standing there on that quiet hillside, began to understand something important about why so many people struggle to feel positive about life. What was happening on that hillside was not magic. It was not even particularly mysterious, once you understand how perception works. The monk, trained in the contemplative traditions, knew enough science to recognize what was occurring. And the explanation, far from diminishing the wonder of the experience, only deepened it. When we see something, what actually happens is a chemical reaction. Light enters the eye and strikes the retina, the sensitive surface at the back of the eyeball. There, photoreceptive cells respond to this light, generating signals that travel to the brain. The brain then constructs an image based on these signals. This is what we call seeing. But here is what most people do not consider. This chemical reaction takes time. Not a long time, but time nonetheless. The cells of the retina need a certain duration of exposure to respond fully. The more time they have, the more completely they respond. The image, as it were, needs time to develop. When we move quickly through the world, our eyes are constantly jumping from one thing to the next. Each glance is brief. Each image begins to form but is interrupted before it can complete itself. The result is a kind of visual shorthand. We see enough to navigate, enough to recognize, enough to categorize. But we do not see the thing itself in its fullness. We see perhaps 10% of what is actually there. The colors are muted because they have not had time to fully register. The details are blurred because the image has been snatched away before it could sharpen. This is how most people experience the world most of the time. We are moving too fast for our own eyes to keep up. We glance rather than gaze. We scan rather than study. And because of this, we live in a world that is literally less colorful, less detailed, and less beautiful than the world that actually exists. When the monk stepped out of the car and began to walk, he slowed down. His eyes had more time with each image. The chemical reactions proceeded further before being interrupted. The picture became clearer, richer, more complete. He saw more because his eyes had more time to see. And when he stopped walking altogether, his eyes had all the time they needed. For the first time in years of traveling that road, he was actually seeing it. The colors that emerged were not imagined. They were there all along. They were simply waiting for someone to stand still long enough to perceive them. Consider what this means for all of our senses. Not just sight, but taste, touch, smell, hearing. Each of these involves processes that unfold over time. Each of them rewards patience and punishes haste. When we eat quickly, we taste only a fraction of our food. When we touch briefly, we feel only a fraction of the texture. When we rush through a conversation, we hear only a fraction of what is being communicated. We are beings built to receive richness, but we have arranged our lives in ways that deliver only poverty. And then we wonder why life feels hollow. We wonder why we struggle to feel positive. We wonder what is missing. What is missing is time. What is missing is stillness. What is missing is the simple willingness to stop. There is an old practice, largely forgotten now in the digital age, that beautifully illustrates this principle. Before cameras became computers, before photographs became instant, there was the dark room. And in the dark room, images were not captured. They were coaxed into being. The process worked like this. When you took a photograph with a film camera, the light passed through the lens and struck a strip of chemically treated film. This exposure created a latent image, invisible to the eye, encoded in the chemistry of the film. To make this image visible, you had to develop it. In the darkroom, under the glow of a red safe light, you would take the film and immerse it in a series of chemical baths. And then, if you were patient, something magical would happen. The image would begin to appear. Not all at once, but gradually. First, you would see only the faintest shadows, the barest hint of shapes. Then, slowly, more detail would emerge. The edges would sharpen. The midtones would fill in. And finally, the full photograph would reveal itself, rich with detail you could not have guessed was there at the beginning. But here is the crucial thing. If you removed the photograph too soon, if you grew impatient and pulled it from the chemicals before the process was complete, the image would be incomplete. It would be washed out, vague, missing its depth and color. The information was there, encoded in the chemistry, but you had not given it time to manifest. This is precisely what we do with life. We take our experiences from the developer too soon. We glance at the world and pull our attention away before the image has time to fully form. And so we live surrounded by washed out, vague impressions of things that are actually vivid, sharp, and beautiful. We see the beginning of life's photographs, but never their completion. The monk on the hillside had accidentally discovered what it means to leave life in the developer long enough. And what emerged was not a faded impression, but a masterpiece. This understanding illuminates something important about modern life. We have built a civilization devoted to speed. We celebrate efficiency. We worship productivity, stated DMI. We measure success by how much we can accomplish in how little time. And in doing so, we have systematically robbed ourselves of the very richness that makes accomplishment worthwhile. Think of how most people move through their days. They wake to an alarm, a jarring interruption of natural rhythms. They hurry through morning routines, barely tasting their breakfast, barely noticing the transition from sleep to wakefulness. They commute in vehicles or trains, sealed away from the world in metal boxes, watching the landscape blur past the windows. At work, they jump from task to task, from meeting to meeting, from screen to screen. In the evening, They consume entertainment that flickers by at 24 frames per second, images changing so fast that the eye cannot linger on any single one. And then they fall into bed, exhausted, only to repeat the cycle the next day. This is life viewed through the window of a fast car. And from inside that car, the world looks dull, grey, devoid of magic. Not because the world has become dull, but because we are moving too fast to see otherwise. We catch glimpses and mistake them for the whole picture. We see the category and miss the particular. We know that there are trees along the road, but we have no idea what the bark looks like. And then we are told to be positive, and we cannot understand why it is so difficult. The monk's experience reveals a different possibility. What if the beauty we are seeking is already here? What if the richness we crave is present all around us, waiting only for us to slow down enough to perceive it? What if positivity is not something we must generate, but something we naturally feel when we finally experience life fully? This is the essence of what the Buddha taught about mindfulness. Not a technique for escaping the world, but a way of finally arriving in it. The present moment, when fully inhabited, reveals itself as far more vivid and alive than anything we could imagine. But we must stop running past it to discover this truth. As the ancient teaching reminds us, the trouble is, you think you have time. We rush because we believe there will always be more time later, a better moment waiting somewhere ahead. But the only moment that exists is this one. And if we hurry through it, we have not saved time. We have wasted the only time there is. Let us return to the monk on the hillside, standing still, watching the world reveal itself. What struck him most powerfully was not any single detail, but the transformation of the ordinary into the extraordinary. Grass. Simple grass. The kind you walk past every day without a thought. Standing there, really seeing it, the grass became something else entirely. The green was not just green. It was alive. It vibrated with an intensity that seemed almost impossible. There were variations in shade that he had never noticed, gradations of light and shadow, movements in the breeze that created patterns like waves on an ocean. This was not special grass. This was ordinary grass, seen with extraordinary attention. And the attention transformed it utterly. This is a profound teaching about the nature of beauty. We tend to believe that some things are beautiful and some things are not. We travel to famous places to see spectacular sights. We seek out the exceptional and the rare. But beauty, true beauty, is not a property of certain special objects. Beauty is what emerges when we meet anything with full attention. The spectacular sights are spectacular because they force us to stop and look. They are big enough, dramatic enough, novel enough to interrupt our usual hurrying. But the truth is that every rock, every leaf, every blade of grass holds the same beauty. We have simply been moving too fast to discover it. The Zen masters understood this well. They spoke of beginner's mind, the quality of perception that sees everything as if for the first time. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, taught one master. In the expert's mind, there are few. The monk on the hillside had accidentally recovered beginner's mind. He had seen that road so many times that he thought he knew it. But the knowing was a kind of blindness. When he finally stopped, when he finally looked with fresh eyes, the familiar became strange and wonderful. This possibility is available to all of us at any moment. We do not need to travel anywhere special. We do not need to wait for perfect conditions. We only need to stop where we are and truly look. The beauty has been waiting all along. We have simply been too busy to notice. So what does this mean for you, sitting or lying or walking wherever you are right now, listening to these words? It means that the positive attitude you have been seeking may be much closer than you think. It means that the problem is not with life, but with the speed at which you have been living it. It means that the colors have been there all along, waiting for you to stand still long enough to see them. This is not a metaphor. This is not a poetic way of speaking about something abstract. This is as literal and practical as the chemistry of your own eyes. When you slow down, you perceive more. When you perceive more, you discover beauty that was invisible before. When you discover beauty, something in you naturally responds with appreciation, with wonder, with what can only be called positivity. Not because you have forced yourself to feel it, because you have finally given yourself the conditions in which it can arise. The Buddha spoke of this when he described the path of awakening. He said that we are like people living in a house with the shutters closed, complaining that there is no light. The light is there. The sun is shining. We only need to open the shutters. And the shutters, in this case, are the barriers we have built against full experience. Our hurrying, our distraction, our endless rushing toward the next thing before we have finished with this thing. The practice, then, is simple. Not easy, but simple. The practice is to slow down. This does not mean you must abandon your responsibilities or retreat from your life. It does not mean you can never move quickly or accomplish tasks efficiently. It means that you build into your day moments of deliberate slowness. Moments when you step out of the fast car and walk. Moments when you stop walking and simply stand. Moments when you look at something, anything, with the full attention it deserves. Perhaps it is your morning tea. Instead of gulping it while checking messages, you hold the cup. You feel its warmth. You watch the steam rise. You bring it to your lips slowly, and you taste it as if you have never tasted tea before. 3 minutes. That is all it takes. And in those 3 minutes, you have practiced the same art the monk practiced on the hillside. Perhaps it is the view from your window. Instead of glancing at it as you pass, you stop. You stand there for 30 seconds, or a minute, or 2 minutes. You look, not thinking about what you see, not categorizing or judging, but simply receiving what your eyes can show you when given time. Perhaps it is a person's face. Instead of half listening while thinking about what you will say next, you look at them. You see the particular lines and colors and expressions that make them who they are. You let their face develop fully in your perception, like a photograph emerging in the darkroom. These small practices accumulate. Each moment of true seeing reminds you what life actually tastes like. And that reminder, repeated day after day, begins to shift something fundamental in your orientation toward existence. You stop needing to force positivity, because positivity arises naturally from the experience of beauty. And beauty, you now know, is everywhere. You only have to slow down to see it. There is a hidden world that exists alongside the one you know. It is not in some other dimension. It is not accessible only to mystics or saints. It is right here, right now, in the very place where you are sitting. But it is hidden from those who move too fast. In this hidden world, colors are richer and more varied than anything you have seen. In this hidden world, textures speak to you, revealing stories written in wood, grain and stone and skin. In this hidden world, ordinary moments contain everything you have been searching for. Not happiness as an achievement, but happiness as a natural response to finally being present. The monk who walked up the hillside that morning discovered this hidden world by accident. But you do not need to wait for accident. You can choose, right now, to slow down. You can choose, right now, to give your senses the time they need. You can choose, right now, to step out of the fast car and walk. And when you do, the world will begin to change. Not because anything external is different, but because you are finally seeing what was always there. The hillside you thought you knew will become strange and new. The life you thought was ordinary will reveal itself as extraordinary. And the positive attitude you have been straining to achieve will arise on its own, as naturally as breath, as inevitably as spring following winter. This is the first teaching. This is where the path begins. Not with effort, but with stillness. Not with striving, but with allowing. Not with forcing yourself to feel what you do not feel, but with giving yourself the conditions in which true feeling becomes possible. Stand still. Look closely. Let the image develop. The beauty has been waiting for you all along. Take a moment now to pause. There is no hurry to continue. Perhaps close your eyes. Perhaps take 3 slow breaths. Perhaps look at something near you, anything at all, and give it the gift of your full attention. The teaching is not only in the hearing. The teaching is in the doing. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have seen how stillness transforms sight, how the simple act of slowing down allows our eyes to receive what was always being offered, how colors deepen, details sharpen, and ordinary landscapes reveal themselves as extraordinary when we give them the time they deserve. But sight is only one doorway into experience. We have been given many doorways, and each of them operates by the same principle. Each of them rewards patience. Each of them punishes haste. Each of them holds treasures that most people never discover, simply because they are moving too fast to receive them. The Buddha spoke of the 6 sense doors: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. Through these doors, he taught, the entire world enters our experience. There is no other way to know anything. Every joy you have ever felt, every beauty you have ever encountered, every moment of peace or wonder or love has come to you through one of these doorways. They are not merely biological functions. They are the sacred portals through which life itself reaches us. And yet, how carelessly we treat them. How little attention we pay to these miraculous gates. We rush past them as if they were mere servants, background processes that require no consideration. We glance without seeing. We hear without listening. We touch without feeling. We eat without tasting. And then we wonder why life seems thin, why satisfaction eludes us, why we feel hungry even when we have consumed so much. The problem is not that life offers too little. The problem is that we receive too little of what life offers. We are like people dying of thirst while standing in the rain simply because we have forgotten to open our mouths. In this teaching, we will explore what happens when we bring the same quality of stillness we discovered on the hillside to all of our senses. We will discover that the richness available to us is beyond anything we have imagined. And we will learn practical ways to open these doors more fully, allowing life to nourish us as it was always meant to do. Consider for a moment the implications of what we learned about sight. When we move too quickly, we receive perhaps 10% of the visual information that is available. The colors are muted. The details are blurred. The image does not have time to fully form. We see a sketch of reality rather than the painting itself. Now extend this understanding to every other sense. When we eat quickly, how much of the taste are we actually receiving? When we listen while distracted, how much of the sound actually reaches us? When we touch briefly and move on, how much of the texture do we perceive? The answer is troubling. Most people, most of the time, are experiencing only a small fraction of what is being offered to them. They are living in a world that is literally less vivid, less flavorful, less textured, less musical than the world that actually exists. Not because their senses are defective, but because they have never learned to use them properly. This has profound implications for happiness. We spend enormous energy seeking out pleasurable experiences. We travel to beautiful places. We buy expensive food and wine. We pursue relationships and achievements and possessions, all in the hope that they will make us feel something. But if we are only capable of receiving 10% of any experience, then even the most extraordinary circumstances will yield only ordinary results. We are trying to fill a cup that has a hole in the bottom. No matter how much we pour in, it drains away before we can drink. The solution is not to seek more experiences. The solution is to receive more fully the experiences we already have. A simple meal, eaten with complete attention, can nourish the soul more deeply than a feast consumed while distracted. A walk through an ordinary neighborhood, taken slowly and with presence, can satisfy more than an expensive vacation rushed through with a camera. This is not deprivation. This is abundance. When you learn to receive fully, you discover that you already have access to more richness than you could ever exhaust. The world is overflowing with beauty and pleasure and meaning. We have simply been too hurried to notice. There is a story that illustrates this beautifully. It concerns a monk who had been practicing for several years when he began to experience some difficulties with his digestion. This is not uncommon among those who live contemplative lives. The body is sensitive, and when we change our patterns of eating and activity, it sometimes needs time to adjust. The monk went to see a doctor who decided to perform a test. In those days, before the sophisticated scanning technology we have now, there was a procedure involving what was called a barium meal. The patient would drink a thick liquid containing barium, a substance that shows up clearly on X-ray images. Then the doctors would watch as this liquid moved through the digestive system, looking for any blockages or abnormalities. The procedure was scheduled for the afternoon. This presented an unexpected problem. You see, monks in this tradition eat only in the morning hours. By afternoon, their digestive systems have naturally quieted down, entering a kind of rest state. The body knows that no food will be coming, so it conserves its energy for other tasks. And so, when the monk lay down on the examination table with the barium liquid in his stomach, the doctors gathered around their screens to watch. And what they saw was nothing. The barium sat there, motionless. The stomach, accustomed to its afternoon rest, showed no interest in processing this unexpected visitor. Minutes passed. The doctors grew puzzled. The procedure could not continue until the digestive system engaged. Then, one of the nurses had an idea. She leaned close to the monk and said, "Think of your favorite food." The monk closed his eyes. Perhaps he thought of a particular dish from his childhood. Perhaps he remembered a meal shared with loved ones. Perhaps he simply imagined something delicious, steaming and fragrant, placed before him. Whatever the specific image, it had an immediate effect. The doctors watching their screens saw the barium begin to move. Without any food actually entering the body, without any physical stimulus at all, the mere thought of eating had awakened the digestive system. Enzymes began to flow. Muscles began to contract. The stomach, moments ago dormant, sprang into activity. This small incident reveals something profound about the connection between mind and body. Your digestive system does not simply respond to the physical presence of food. It responds to your awareness of food. It responds to your attention, your anticipation, your mental engagement with the act of eating. When you think about food, your body prepares to receive it. Saliva flows in your mouth. Acids are released in your stomach. The entire complex machinery of digestion activates itself, readying for nourishment. Now consider what this means for how most people eat. They sit down with food, but their minds are elsewhere. They are watching a screen. They are reading something. They are having a conversation that has nothing to do with eating. They are planning their afternoon or reviewing their morning. Their body receives physical food, but their mind has not signaled that eating is occurring. The digestive system, receiving no mental cues that it should prepare itself, operates at a fraction of its capacity. This is why so many people suffer from digestive troubles. This is why food often fails to satisfy, why we can eat a full meal and still feel somehow hungry. We have fed the body but starved the mind. We have provided the raw materials but not the conditions for proper processing. In many contemplative traditions, meals are taken in silence. This is sometimes misunderstood as a form of austerity, a denial of the social pleasures of eating together. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Eating in silence is not deprivation. It is the doorway to a richness that talking and distraction make impossible. When you eat in silence with your full attention on the food before you, something remarkable happens. The flavors intensify. Tastes you never noticed emerge from familiar foods. The texture becomes vivid and interesting. The simple act of chewing, usually performed unconsciously, becomes a kind of meditation. You discover that eating, truly eating, is one of the great pleasures available to human beings. And there is more. When you eat with attention, your body responds appropriately. The digestive juices flow as they should. The food is processed efficiently. Nutrients are absorbed more completely. You feel satisfied with less, not because you are denying yourself, but because you are finally receiving the nourishment that hurried eating never delivers. The Buddha himself taught about this. He instructed his monks to eat mindfully, knowing what they were doing as they were doing it. When eating, just eat, he said. This sounds almost absurdly simple. Of course, when eating, we eat. What else would we do? But the truth is that most people, when eating, are doing a dozen things other than eating. They are thinking, planning, worrying, entertaining themselves, conversing. The eating happens, but it happens in the background, like music playing in a store that no one is really listening to. To eat mindfully is to bring the eating into the foreground. It is to make the meal the main event rather than the backdrop for other activities. And when you do this, when you give your food the same quality of attention the monk gave to the hillside, the results are transformative. Here is how you might practice this. Choose one meal this week to eat in complete silence and solitude. It need not be a large meal. A simple breakfast will do. Prepare your food with care, noticing the colors and textures as you do so. When you sit down to eat, sit with the intention of doing nothing else. No book, no phone, no screen, no planning, just you and the food. Before you begin eating, take a moment to look at what is before you. Really look. Notice the colors, the shapes, the way the light falls on the surface. If there is steam rising, watch it. If there are aromas, breathe them in. Ride aromas, breathe them in. Let your senses begin to engage before the first bite. Then, when you take that first bite, do so slowly. Feel the texture against your tongue. Notice the initial flavors and how they change as you chew. Chew more slowly than you normally would. There is no hurry. There is nowhere else to be. This meal, this bite, this moment is the entirety of your world right now. As you swallow, feel the food descending. Notice the satisfaction of nourishment entering your body. Then pause for a moment before the next bite. Let each mouthful be its own complete experience rather than a blur of continuous consumption. Eating this way, you will likely find that you eat less than usual. Not because you are restricting yourself, but because you are satisfied sooner. The body, receiving the mental signals it needs, processes the food efficiently and communicates clearly when it has had enough. The compulsion to overeat, which often comes from not fully experiencing what we have eaten, naturally diminishes. You may also find that simple foods become surprisingly delicious. A bowl of plain rice, eaten with complete attention, can be more satisfying than an elaborate meal consumed while distracted. The richness was always there in the rice. You were simply moving too fast to taste it. What we have discovered about sight and taste applies equally to hearing. Sound, too, reveals hidden depths when we give it proper attention. And sound, too, is routinely diminished by our hurrying, distracted minds. Think of how you normally listen to music. Perhaps it plays in the background while you do other things. Perhaps you hear it through small speakers on a phone, compressed and diminished from the original recording. Perhaps you listen while driving or working or exercising, your attention divided among many things. Under these conditions, you might enjoy the music, but you are not really hearing it. You are hearing a sketch, a suggestion, a fraction of what the musicians created. Now imagine listening differently. Imagine sitting in a quiet room with nothing else to do. Imagine good speakers or headphones that can reproduce the full range of sound. Imagine closing your eyes and giving the music your complete attention, as if it were the most important thing in the world, because in that moment, it is. Under these conditions, familiar songs become new. You hear instruments you never noticed. You perceive subtleties of rhythm and harmony that were always present but never registered. The music gains dimension and depth, becoming not just pleasant sound, but a world you can enter and explore. The same principle applies to all sound. The birds outside your window are singing complex songs that most people never hear. The wind has a voice that speaks differently in different seasons. The rain falling on various surfaces creates a symphony of percussion. Even silence, when truly listened to, reveals itself as full of subtle sound, the almost inaudible hum of existence itself. To hear these things requires the same quality we have been cultivating: stillness. Not just physical stillness, but mental stillness. A quieting of the internal chatter that normally drowns out the subtler sounds of the world. When the mind grows quiet, the ears open. When we stop generating so much internal noise, we begin to hear what has been playing all along. The ancient teachers understood this. Silence is the language of God, one mystic wrote. All else is poor translation. This is not merely poetic. It is pointing to something real. In the depths of silence, we begin to hear things that cannot be heard any other way. Not supernatural things, necessarily, but the natural things that our usual noise obscures. The whisper of our own intuition, the subtle communications of our body, the quiet guidance that is always available when we stop shouting over it. Of all our senses, touch is perhaps the most neglected by modern life. We live increasingly in our heads, interacting with the world through screens and abstractions. The body, that miraculous instrument of sensation, is often treated as merely a vehicle for carrying the brain from place to place. We forget that we are embodied beings, that our skin is our largest organ, that we are meant to feel the world directly. And yet, touch remains one of the most powerful doorways to presence. It is difficult to think about the past or future while truly feeling something with your hands. Touch anchors us in the immediate moment like almost nothing else can. Consider the difference between touching something casually and touching it with full attention. Pick up any object near you right now. Hold it without really attending to it, the way you normally hold things. Notice how little information you receive. Now close your eyes and bring your complete attention to your fingertips. Explore the object as if you had never encountered anything like it before. Feel its weight, its temperature, its texture. Notice the subtle variations across its surface. Let your fingers read it like braille. The difference is remarkable. The same object, held in the same hand, becomes an entirely different experience when met with full attention. Details emerge that were completely invisible before. The object becomes interesting, even fascinating, regardless of what it is. A stone, a piece of wood, a simple cup can become a source of genuine discovery when touched with presence. This principle extends to all physical experience. The feeling of water on your skin in the shower, the sensation of your feet meeting the ground as you walk, the pressure of the chair supporting you right now, the touch of clothing against your body. All of these are happening continuously, but most of the time we do not feel them. They occur below the threshold of awareness, processed by the body but not experienced by the conscious mind. To bring awareness to touch is to reclaim a vast territory of experience that has been abandoned. It is to re-inhabit your own body, to come home to physical existence. And in that homecoming, there is a kind of peace that cannot be found any other way. The body, when truly inhabited, is not a source of anxiety or dissatisfaction. It is a source of grounding, of simple presence, of being fully here in a world that can only be touched right now. We have been exploring the senses one by one, but in lived experience, they do not operate in isolation. Right now, as you listen to these words, you are also seeing, or perhaps sitting in darkness. You are feeling the temperature of the air, the pressure of surfaces against your body. You may be aware of smells in your environment, tastes lingering in your mouth. All of these streams of sensation are flowing simultaneously, weaving together into the unified fabric of this moment. When we slow down, we begin to notice this weaving. We begin to experience life not as a series of isolated sensory events, but as a rich, integrated whole. The sound of a bird becomes connected to the sight of trees moving in wind, which connects to the feeling of breeze on skin, which connects to the smell of growing things. Each sense enriches the others. Each doorway opens onto the same vast room of presence. This is what the contemplatives mean when they speak of being fully present. Not attentive to one thing at the expense of everything else, but attentive to the fullness of immediate experience. Not narrowly focused, but widely open. Receiving all that is offered through all the doorways at once. In this state, the artificial problem of needing to be positive dissolves entirely. When you are fully present to the richness of sensory experience, positivity is not something you must manufacture. It arises naturally as a response to the overwhelming gift of being alive in a body, in a world, in this irreplaceable moment. You do not need to convince yourself that life is good. You feel it directly, through every nerve and cell. The Buddha described this as clear comprehension, one of the foundations of mindfulness. It is knowing what is happening while it is happening through all the channels by which experience reaches us. It is not a special state reserved for advanced practitioners. It is simply what happens when we stop interfering with our own experience, when we stop rushing and filtering and abstracting, when we allow ourselves to simply be here, sensing what is to be sensed. There is a teaching story about a poor farmer who worked hard all his life on a small plot of land. He struggled to feed his family, always worried about money, always feeling that he did not have enough. When he died, his children inherited the land and decided to dig a well to irrigate the fields. And there, just beneath the surface where their father had walked every day of his life, they discovered a vast deposit of precious gems. The farmer had been wealthy beyond imagination all along. He simply had never looked beneath his feet. This story points to something essential about the practice we are exploring. We are not trying to acquire something we lack. We are trying to discover something we already possess. The richness of sensory experience, the profound nourishment available in every moment, the joy that arises from full presence, none of these need to be created or achieved. They are already here, just beneath the surface of our hurried lives, waiting to be uncovered. The tragedy is not that life is poor. The tragedy is that we walk over treasure every day without knowing it. We rush past miracle after miracle in our pursuit of some future satisfaction that we believe will finally make us happy. Meanwhile, happiness is available right now, in the feeling of breath entering the body, in the sight of light falling through a window, in the taste of simple food eaten with attention. We are beggars sitting on boxes of gold. The practice of deep perception is not about adding something to your life. It is about removing the obstacles to receiving what is already being offered. It is about slowing down enough to actually experience the wealth that surrounds you. It is about opening the doors that you have unconsciously kept closed. When you do this, when you begin to live in the full dimensionality of sensory experience, something shifts in your relationship to life. The constant seeking relaxes. The restless wanting quiets. You discover that this moment, any moment, is enough. Not because you have lowered your standards or resigned yourself to less, but because you have finally realized how much has been available all along. As the ancient text says, enough is a feast. When you learn to receive fully, you discover that you have always had enough. More than enough. An abundance beyond measure. The feast was always laid out before you. You were simply eating too fast to taste it. There is one more dimension to explore before we close this teaching. The full engagement of our senses is not only a path to enjoyment and presence, it is also a path to healing. When we are cut off from our bodies, when we live in abstraction and distraction, illness often follows. The body sends signals that we do not hear. Small imbalances grow into large problems because we were not present to address them early. Stress accumulates because we do not notice it building. We override fatigue, ignore hunger, suppress discomfort, and then wonder why we are sick. Conversely, when we come home to the body, when we begin to listen to its wisdom through the doorways of sensation, healing becomes possible. The body knows what it needs. It communicates constantly about food, rest, movement, and attention. We have simply stopped listening. The practice of sensory awareness is therefore a practice of health. When you eat mindfully, you naturally eat what your body actually needs. When you listen to your body, you rest when you are tired and move when you have been still too long. When you are present to physical sensation, you notice the early signs of imbalance and can address them before they become serious. This is not a replacement for medical care. When you are ill, you should seek appropriate treatment, but it is a foundation upon which medical care can work more effectively. A person who is present to their body is a partner in their own healing. They can provide accurate information about what they are experiencing. They can sense what helps and what does not. They can support the healing process with the intelligence that only comes from direct bodily awareness. The Buddha taught that the body is like a wound, always requiring attention and care. This is sometimes interpreted pessimistically, as if the body were merely a burden. But another reading is possible. To say the body requires attention is to say that the body deserves attention. It is to honor this physical form that allows us to exist in the world, to experience beauty and connection and love. Caring for the body through mindful attention is not a chore. It is an act of gratitude for the gift of embodiment. We have traveled far in this teaching, from the hillside where we learn to see, through the many doorways of sensation that allow the world to reach us. We have discovered that the richness we seek is not far away. It is as close as the next breath, the next taste, the next moment of contact between self and world. We have only to slow down and receive it. This is the invitation. Become a person who receives fully, not passively, not without engagement, but with the full presence that allows experience to register in its completeness. Stop skimming the surface of life and begin to dive beneath it. Stop glancing and start gazing. Stop nibbling and start savoring. Stop brushing against existence and start embracing it. The rewards of this practice are immediate. You do not need to wait years to benefit. The very next meal you eat with attention will be more nourishing than meals eaten in distraction. The very next thing you look at with full presence will reveal beauty you did not know was there. The very next sound you truly listen to will open dimensions of experience that hurry keeps hidden. And as these moments accumulate, as you build a life of deeper reception, something fundamental shifts. The frantic seeking quiets because you are already finding. The anxiety of lack dissolves because you are experiencing abundance. The forced positivity becomes unnecessary because genuine appreciation arises naturally from genuine experience. This is the path, not to somewhere else, but more deeply into where you already are. Not to some future satisfaction, but to the satisfaction that is available now, that has always been available, that waits only for your attention to be revealed. The senses are your birthright. The world is your feast. The doorways stand open. All you need to do is slow down enough to walk through. Take a moment now to rest. Perhaps bring your attention to whatever you can hear around you. Not straining to hear, not seeking out sounds, but simply opening to receive whatever reaches your ears. Let the sounds be as they are, without needing to identify or judge them. This is the practice. This is the doorway. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have learned to see the hidden beauty in a hillside. We have learned to taste the hidden richness in simple food. We have learned that stillness opens doorways to dimensions of experience that hurry keeps forever closed. But now we come to a more challenging teaching. Now we must ask, can the same principle be applied to people? It is one thing to slow down and perceive the exquisite texture of bark on a tree. Trees do not judge us. They do not carry histories of harm. They do not trigger our fears or resentments. Looking deeply at nature is relatively easy because nature does not look back with complicated eyes. But human beings are different. When we look at another person, we bring all our assumptions, our categories, our past experiences. We see their surface and believe we know their depths. We see their actions and believe we know their essence. We judge quickly and move on, just as we once glanced at the hillside through a car window and thought we knew what was there. What happens when we bring the same quality of stillness, the same patient attention, to another human being? What do we see when we stop long enough to let the image fully form? This is the question at the heart of compassion. And the answer, as we shall discover, has the power to heal not only the one who is seen, but also the one who sees. There is a story about a monk who, as part of his service, would sometimes visit people in places of confinement. These were not monasteries or retreat centers. These were places where society sends those it wishes to forget. Prisons, secure facilities, places behind high walls and locked doors where people live with the weight of their worst moments defining their entire existence. The monk did not go to these places to preach or to convert. He went simply to be present with those who had been abandoned by almost everyone else. He went to sit with them, to listen to them, to look at them with eyes unclouded by judgment. Now, you might imagine that this would be difficult. These were not people who had made small mistakes. Some had caused terrible harm. Some had done things that most of us cannot even imagine doing. By any ordinary measure, they were not people who deserved respect or kindness. Society had judged them, and the judgment seemed fair. But the monk had learned something on that hillside years before. He had learned that when you slow down, when you truly look, you see things that hurrying makes invisible. He had learned that beauty exists in places you would never think to look for it. And he wondered, could this be true of people as well as landscapes? So when he sat with these confined individuals, he did not see them as society saw them. He did not see them as the sum of their worst actions. He looked at them the way he had learned to look at that hillside, slowly, patiently, without rushing to conclusions, allowing the full picture to form. And what he saw astonished him. Beneath the hardened surfaces, beneath the defenses built up over years of rejection, beneath the identity of criminal or dangerous or beyond redemption, he saw something else. He saw human beings who had once been children. He saw people who had been hurt before they hurt others. He saw flickers of kindness that had somehow survived in the harshest conditions. He saw, in short, the same basic goodness that exists in all beings, buried perhaps, obscured certainly, but present nonetheless. This was not naivety. The monk did not pretend that harmful actions had not occurred. He did not minimize the suffering that had been caused, but he recognized something that judgment makes invisible. A person is always more than the worst thing they have ever done. What happened next was remarkable. When the monk looked at these individuals with eyes that saw their deeper nature, something shifted in them. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible, but over time, it became unmistakable. People who had grown accustomed to being looked at with fear, disgust, or cold indifference suddenly found themselves in the presence of someone who saw something else. Someone who looked at them and perceived not a monster but a human being. Not a lost cause but a person still capable of goodness. Not the worst moment of their life but the wholeness that contained that moment and so much more. This experience of being truly seen is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. We all long for it. We all need it. And most of us rarely receive it. Even those of us who live ordinary lives, who have not committed terrible acts, often feel unseen. We feel that people respond to our roles, our appearances, our social positions, but not to who we actually are. We wear masks and others see only the masks. The person behind the mask grows lonely, starved for authentic recognition. For those who have been cast out, who have been defined entirely by their failures, this loneliness is total. They have not merely been unseen, they have been seen wrongly. The image others hold of them is a distortion, a caricature, a reduction of a complex human being to a single category. And eventually, tragically, they begin to see themselves through these same distorting eyes. They become, in their own minds, what others have decided they are. When someone finally looks at them differently, when someone sees through the distortion to the person underneath, it is like water in the desert. Something that was dying begins to revive. The possibility of being something other than what they have been labeled begins to seem real. The Buddha taught that all beings possess Buddha nature, the seed of awakening that can never be destroyed no matter what obscures it. This teaching is not mere philosophy. It is a way of seeing. When you look at any being with the recognition that their deepest nature is pure, that their harmful actions arise from confusion and suffering rather than from some essential badness, you offer them something precious. You offer them the possibility of becoming who they truly are, rather than remaining trapped in who they have seemed to be. There is something particular about respect that makes it a force for transformation. Not approval of harmful actions, not denial of the need for accountability, but respect for the basic humanity that remains intact beneath all the layers of confusion and harm. When the monk sat with those confined individuals and looked at them with genuine respect, he was not respecting what they had done. He was respecting something much deeper, their fundamental capacity for goodness, their unbroken connection to the same human family that includes us all, their potential for growth and change and healing. And here is what he discovered. When people feel respected, they begin to respect themselves. When someone who knows the full truth of what they have done still looks at them with dignity, they begin to wonder if perhaps they are worthy of dignity after all. When someone sees beauty in them, they begin to look for that beauty themselves. This is not a quick fix. This is not a single conversation that undoes years of damage. But it is the beginning of something. It plants a seed. And given time and the right conditions, seeds grow. The monk observed that some of those he visited began to change. Not because he lectured them or tried to reform them, but simply because he saw them differently. They began to access parts of themselves that had been buried under shame and rejection. They began to nurture those parts instead of the parts that caused harm. They began, slowly, to become the person that someone had finally seen in them. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of watering wholesome seeds. Every person contains seeds of many kinds, seeds of kindness and seeds of cruelty, seeds of generosity and seeds of greed, seeds of peace and seeds of violence. Which seeds grow depends largely on which seeds are watered. And one of the most powerful ways to water a seed is to recognize it, to see it, to acknowledge its existence. When we look at someone and see only their faults, we water those seeds of fault. We reinforce the identity they have built around their worst qualities. But when we look at someone and see their goodness, even if that goodness is barely visible, we water different seeds entirely. We give those seeds of goodness the recognition they need to grow. There is a story about a visit to a place of healing for those who struggle with mental illness. This was not a grim institution of the old kind, where patients were merely contained and managed. This was a modern facility, staffed by people who had thought deeply about what healing actually requires. After speaking with the staff there, the monk learned something that stayed with him for years afterward. The philosophy of this place was different from what he had encountered elsewhere. Instead of focusing primarily on what was wrong with each patient, instead of defining them by their symptoms and diagnoses, the staff made a deliberate choice to focus on what was right. They looked for the part of each person that was healthy, functional, capable of connection and growth. They looked for the moments when the person was not dominated by their illness, the hours or minutes when they could think clearly and relate normally and participate in life. And they watered those moments. They nurtured those parts. They built their entire approach to treatment around strengthening what was strong rather than only fighting what was wrong. This was not denial. They did not pretend that the illness did not exist or that the symptoms did not matter. When someone was in crisis, they responded appropriately. But they held a larger vision, a vision that included the whole person, not just the part that was struggling. They remembered, even when the patient could not remember, that there was more to this person than their diagnosis. The monk recognized this immediately as deep wisdom. It was the same principle he had discovered on the hillside, the same principle he applied when visiting those in confinement. It was the recognition that what we focus on grows, that attention is a form of nourishment, that we can choose to nourish health, or we can choose to nourish illness, but we cannot do both at once. In Buddhism, this is sometimes called right attention or wise attention. It is not about ignoring what is negative, but about not becoming fixated on it. It is about maintaining a balanced awareness that can acknowledge difficulty while also recognizing the resources available to address it. It is about seeing the whole picture rather than becoming hypnotized by one corner of it. There is a famous teaching about a monk who, in his younger days, helped to build a wall for his monastery. He had never done brickwork before, and when the wall was finished, he was distressed to see that 2 of the bricks were crooked. They stood out, at least to his eyes, as obvious flaws in an otherwise acceptable wall. For years afterward, whenever he looked at that wall, all he could see were those 2 bad bricks. He tried to find ways to cover them or remove them, but it was impossible without dismantling the entire wall. The bad bricks became a source of ongoing frustration, a reminder of his imperfection, a blemish that seemed to grow larger every time he looked. Then one day, a visitor came to the monastery and commented on the beautiful wall. The monk laughed bitterly and said, "Do you not see those 2 crooked bricks? They ruin the whole thing." The visitor looked carefully at the wall and then said something that changed the monk's perspective forever. "I see 2 bad bricks," he said, "but I also see 998 good bricks. Why do you focus only on the 2? This question opened something in the monk's mind. He had been so fixated on what was wrong that he had become blind to what was right. He had allowed 2 bricks out of 1,000 to define his entire experience of the wall. He had taken a structure that was 99.8% successful and treated it as a failure. And he realized that he did the same thing with himself. He focused on his faults, his failures, his mistakes, and allowed them to define his sense of who he was. He overlooked the countless moments of kindness, the years of sincere practice, the genuine progress he had made. He saw only the 2 bad bricks. This is what most of us do, both with ourselves and with others. We zoom in on the flaws and lose sight of the whole. We define people by their worst moments and forget the thousands of moments that were not their worst. We construct identities out of mistakes and then act as if those identities were the complete truth. The practice of positive perception is the practice of seeing the whole wall, not denying that the bad bricks exist, but refusing to let them dominate our vision. Choosing to also see, to equally see, to perhaps even emphasize the good bricks that make up the majority of the structure. We have spoken of looking at others with eyes that perceive their deeper goodness. But there is a more difficult application of this teaching, one that many people struggle with far more than they struggle to see goodness in others. Can you look at yourself this way? The monk who visited places of confinement discovered something troubling in his years of speaking with people. Almost no one, regardless of their circumstances, felt at peace with themselves. The wealthy felt inadequate. The accomplished felt like frauds. The admired felt unworthy of admiration. Even those who seemed to have everything lived with a persistent sense that something was wrong with them, that they were not good enough, that they did not deserve the respect and love they received. This epidemic of low self-worth is one of the great sufferings of our time. It cuts across all boundaries of culture, class, and achievement. It affects the successful as much as the struggling. It whispers constantly in people's ears that they are not enough, that they must do more, become more, prove more before they can finally be acceptable. Where does this come from? How did we learn to see ourselves with such harsh and unforgiving eyes? Part of it is training. From an early age, we are taught to notice our mistakes and correct them. When we do something wrong, attention is paid. When we do something right, it is often treated as merely expected, not worthy of comment. We learn that errors are significant and successes are normal. We learn to scan for what is wrong with us rather than what is right. Part of it is also a misunderstanding about humility. We believe that acknowledging our goodness would be arrogant, that we must constantly minimize ourselves to be decent people. We confuse self-hatred with modesty. We think that the proper way to be is to always see ourselves as inadequate, always striving, never arriving. But this is not humility. True humility is accurate perception, seeing oneself as one actually is, neither inflated nor deflated. An accurate perception would reveal that every human being, including you, contains tremendous goodness, tremendous capacity, tremendous beauty. To refuse to see this is not modesty. It is a form of blindness. There is a story about a gathering where ordinary people were honored for their service to others. These were not famous people. These were individuals who had spent years, sometimes decades, quietly helping their communities without seeking recognition or reward. Teachers who stayed late for struggling students. Volunteers who showed up week after week at shelters and food banks. Neighbors who checked on the elderly. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply because it was right. One by one, they were called forward to receive acknowledgement of their contributions. And one by one, something curious happened. Almost without exception, they deflected the praise. "I do not deserve this," one said. "There are so many others who do more." Another said, "I really have not done anything special. Anyone would have done the same." Another simply looked uncomfortable, as if the recognition were a burden rather than a gift. Watching this, an observer felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, the humility of these people was touching. On the other hand, there was something sad about it. Here were individuals who had genuinely earned admiration, who had made real differences in real lives, who had contributed something valuable to the world. And they could not see it. They could not accept that they were worthy of gratitude. They could not look in the mirror and perceive the goodness that everyone else could see. The observer recognized himself in their discomfort. He too struggled to accept praise. He too deflected recognition of his good qualities while dwelling endlessly on his faults. He too looked at himself and saw mostly the two bad bricks. And he wondered, what would happen if we could learn to see ourselves the way we learn to see a hillside? What if we could slow down and look at ourselves with patient, gentle attention, allowing the full picture to form? What if we could perceive our own beauty with the same clarity we can sometimes perceive beauty in nature or in others? There is a fear that prevents many people from seeing their own goodness. They believe that if they acknowledge their positive qualities, they will become arrogant. They will become that insufferable person who brags about themselves, who thinks they are better than others, who loses touch with their genuine humility. This fear is understandable but mistaken. It confuses two very different things. To see your goodness and become puffed up with pride, looking down on others, is indeed a problem. This is what might be called becoming big-headed. But this is not what happens when you genuinely perceive your own beauty. What happens instead is that you become big-hearted. When you truly see the goodness in yourself, something softens. You become gentler with yourself, and this gentleness naturally extends to others. You become more forgiving of your own mistakes, and this makes you more forgiving of everyone's mistakes. You become less defensive, less anxious to prove yourself, less driven by the desperate need to be enough. From this place of inner security, you can offer genuine kindness without any agenda, because you are no longer trying to earn your worth through your actions. The big-headed person is actually someone who does not believe in their own goodness. They are constantly trying to convince themselves and others of their value. Their arrogance is a defense against a deep inner sense of inadequacy. They need external validation because they have no internal foundation. The big-hearted person is the opposite. They have found their own foundation. They have seen their own goodness, not as superiority to others, but as their participation in the goodness that exists in all beings. From this recognition, they can celebrate others without envy and receive praise without discomfort. They can acknowledge their faults without being destroyed by them and recognize their virtues without being inflated by them. This is the fruit of turning the practice of deep perception inward. When you slow down and look at yourself with the same patient attention you give to a hillside or a piece of music, you begin to see what you have been missing. Not a perfect being, free of all faults, but a complex, struggling, beautiful human being, doing your best in a difficult world. Someone worthy of your own compassion. Someone worthy of respect. We began this teaching by asking whether the principle of stillness revealing beauty could be applied to people as well as landscapes. We have seen that it can. We have seen that when we slow down and truly look at another person, even a person who has caused great harm, we can perceive goodness that hurried judgment makes invisible. We have seen that this seeing has the power to heal, to transform, to water the seeds of positive possibility in those who have been written off by the world. And we have seen that the most challenging application of this practice is to ourselves. We have seen that most people live with a crippling inability to perceive their own beauty, and that this blindness causes immense suffering. We have seen that the path out of this suffering is not to force ourselves to believe we are good, but to slow down and look, to give ourselves the same quality of attention we have learned to give to the outer world. The Buddha taught that each being is like a moon. There is always a bright side, even when only the dark side is visible. When we see only the dark side of a person, whether that person is another or ourselves, we are not seeing the whole truth. We are seeing what our hurried, judgmental perception allows us to see, which is always partial, always incomplete. The practice of positive perception is the practice of looking for the bright side, not denying the dark, but refusing to be hypnotized by it. Remembering that the moon is always whole, even when we can only see a sliver. Trusting that the light exists, even when our current vantage point does not reveal it. This is not optimism in the shallow sense. It is not pretending that everything is fine when it is not. It is a deeper recognition that every being, without exception, contains the capacity for goodness, for growth, for awakening, and that this capacity can be supported or suppressed by how we choose to see. When you look at another person and see their light, you support that light. You give it permission to grow. You create conditions in which it can emerge from behind the shadows that have hidden it. This is one of the greatest gifts you can give another being, the gift of being seen in their wholeness. And when you look at yourself and see your own light, you give yourself the same gift. You create conditions in which your own goodness can flourish. You stop watering the seeds of self-hatred and start watering the seeds of self-compassion. You begin to become the person you have always had the potential to be. There is one more dimension to this teaching, one more layer to understand before we rest. When you see the light in another person, something happens in them. But something also happens in you. The act of seeing goodness cultivates goodness in the seer. The act of looking for light strengthens your own light. This is because perception is not passive. When you choose to look for beauty, you are training your mind in a certain direction. You are building mental habits that will shape all your future experience. Each time you perceive goodness in another, you make it easier to perceive goodness in the next person, and the next, and eventually in yourself. Conversely, each time you focus on faults, on failures, on the darkness in another, you train your mind in the opposite direction. You become better at seeing what is wrong and worse at seeing what is right. Your world becomes populated with flawed, disappointing people, because that is what your trained perception reveals. This is why the practice of positive perception is not merely a nicety, not merely a way to be kind to others. It is a practice for your own liberation. It is a way of freeing yourself from the prison of constant judgment and criticism. It is a path to joy. And there is more. When you see the light in someone and they begin to change, when they begin to see their own light in response to your seeing, they become more likely to see the light in others. Your gift of perception creates ripples that extend far beyond the immediate interaction. The person you saw clearly may go on to see someone else clearly, who sees someone else, and so on. One act of true seeing can initiate a chain of healing that touches lives you will never know. This is how the world changes. Not through grand gestures and massive movements, though these have their place, but through countless small acts of genuine perception. Countless moments when one human being truly sees another. These moments accumulate. They shift the balance. They make the whole world a little more whole. You have this power. Every time you slow down and truly look at another person, you exercise it. Every time you refuse to reduce someone to their faults and instead perceive their fuller humanity, you participate in the healing of the world. This is the gift of attention. This is the fruit of stillness. This is what becomes possible when we stop rushing past each other and start truly seeing. Take a moment now to rest in silence. Perhaps bring to mind someone you have judged harshly, someone whose faults have dominated your perception of them. Without forcing anything, simply wonder if there might be more to see. Wonder if there might be light that your hurried judgment has missed. You do not need to resolve anything. Simply allow the question to be present. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have traveled deep into the practice of seeing. We have learned to perceive beauty in landscapes, richness in sensory experience, and light in the hearts of others and ourselves. We have discovered that stillness reveals what hurrying hides, and that attention is a form of nourishment that helps things grow. Now we must explore this principle of nourishment more deeply. For there is a crucial truth we have only touched upon, a truth that lies at the heart of how the mind works and how our lives unfold. It is simply this: what we attend to grows. This is not a metaphor. This is not a poetic way of speaking. This is the actual mechanics of consciousness. The mind is like a garden, and attention is like water. Whatever we water will flourish. Whatever we neglect will wither. And we are, whether we realize it or not, constantly choosing what to water. In every garden, there are flowers and there are weeds. The flowers are beautiful. They bring joy and color and life. The weeds are tenacious. They spread quickly and choke out everything else if left unchecked. A wise gardener knows that the secret to a beautiful garden is not merely to plant flowers, but to be mindful of what receives water. Water the flowers, and they grow strong and abundant. Water the weeds, and they take over everything. Your mind works in exactly the same way. Within you are seeds of many kinds. Seeds of kindness and seeds of cruelty. Seeds of peace and seeds of anger. Seeds of generosity and seeds of greed. Seeds of joy and seeds of sorrow. All of these exist within you, planted there by genetics, by upbringing, by experience, by the countless influences that have shaped you into who you are. Which seeds grow into plants depends entirely on which seeds receive water. And the water in this garden is your attention. When you dwell on your resentments, replaying old hurts in your mind, you water the seeds of anger. When you focus on what you lack, comparing yourself unfavorably to others, you water the seeds of dissatisfaction. When you rehearse your fears, imagining all the ways things could go wrong, you water the seeds of anxiety. These seeds do not need much encouragement. They are hardy. They grow quickly with very little water. And once they have taken root, they are difficult to remove. But the same is true of the beneficial seeds. When you recall moments of gratitude, savoring the good things in your life, you water the seeds of contentment. When you focus on your capacity for growth rather than your history of failure, you water the seeds of confidence. When you attend to the present moment with openness and curiosity, you water the seeds of peace. These seeds may be more delicate than the weeds, but they are also more beautiful. And with consistent watering, they too can flourish. The Buddha understood this deeply. He taught that the mind takes the shape of what it rests upon. If you rest your mind on thoughts of ill will, the mind becomes ill-willed. If you rest your mind on thoughts of love, the mind becomes loving. This is not philosophy. This is observation. This is what happens. Consider how this works in daily life. You wake in the morning, and before you have even risen from bed, the mind begins its habitual patterns. Perhaps it immediately reaches for worries about the coming day. Perhaps it reviews the grievances of yesterday. Perhaps it rehearses conversations that have not yet happened, imagining conflicts and preparing defenses. None of this is conscious. None of this is chosen. It is simply the mind doing what it has been trained to do, watering the seeds that have received the most water in the past. But imagine a different morning. Imagine waking and, before the habitual patterns can take hold, bringing your attention to something simple and nourishing. The sensation of breath, the warmth of blankets, the gift of another day of life. Imagine holding your attention there, gently, for even a few moments before the mind rushes off to its usual concerns. This small act, repeated daily, would begin to change the garden. The seeds of peace and gratitude, watered each morning, would grow stronger. The weeds of worry and resentment, deprived of their usual first feeding of the day, would grow slightly weaker. Over weeks and months, the cumulative effect would be significant. This is not wishful thinking. This is the mechanics of mind. Neuroscientists now confirm what contemplatives have known for millennia. The brain physically changes in response to repeated patterns of attention. What we focus on literally reshapes the structure of our nervous system. We are, in a very real sense, building our brains with our attention, moment by moment, thought by thought. And so the question becomes, what are you watering? Understanding this principle is one thing. Living it is another. Because there is a strange phenomenon in human psychology, something that seems almost contradictory until you examine it closely. People often water their weeds. They focus on their pain, their grievances, their failures, their fears. They return again and again to what hurts them. And they do this not because they are foolish, but because the weeds have become familiar. There is a comfort in familiarity, even when what is familiar is painful. The known suffering feels safer than the unknown alternative. We have learned to navigate our particular patterns of misery. We know their contours, their rhythms, their demands. They have become part of our identity, woven into our sense of who we are. This is why people sometimes resist healing. This is why those who have suffered sometimes cling to their suffering even when offered a way out. The suffering has become home. And leaving home, even a painful home, is frightening. There is a story that illustrates this with startling clarity. It is an old story, one that has been told in many forms, across many traditions. But its message remains as relevant today as it ever was. Once, long ago, there were two friends who had grown up together and remained close throughout their lives. They had shared everything, their joys and sorrows, their triumphs and failures, their deepest questions about the meaning of existence. When they were young, they had made a pact that whoever found wisdom first would share it with the other. Their bond was unbreakable. In time, both friends entered a spiritual community, seeking to deepen their understanding and purify their minds. They practiced side by side for many years, but their paths diverged in ways they did not expect. One of the friends took to the practice wholeheartedly. He examined his mind with honesty, let go of his attachments, and cultivated kindness and wisdom with great sincerity. The other friend struggled. He went through the motions of practice, but his heart was not fully committed. He cut corners, indulged in distractions, and told himself that there would always be time later to get serious. When death came for them, as it comes for all beings, the consequences of their choices became clear. The sincere friend, having purified his mind and cultivated virtue, found himself reborn in a realm of great beauty and peace. It was a place of light and harmony, where suffering was unknown and joy was the natural state of existence. The other friend, having squandered his opportunity, found himself reborn in far less pleasant circumstances. Through the workings of cause and effect, he took birth as a small creature living in a pile of dung. Now, in this realm of beauty, the first friend eventually noticed that something was missing. His companion, his lifelong friend, was nowhere to be found. Using the subtle abilities that beings in such realms possess, he searched for his friend. He looked in the higher realms, thinking perhaps his friend had surpassed him. He was not there. He looked in the human realm, thinking perhaps his friend had taken another birth to continue practicing. He was not there either. With growing concern, he looked in the animal realms. Still no trace. Finally, with great reluctance, he looked in the lowest places. And there, to his horror, he found his friend, a small worm, living in a pile of dung. The first friend was overcome with compassion. He remembered their pact, their bond, their shared aspiration. He could not leave his friend in such a state. So he descended from his realm of light and approached the pile of dung where his friend now lived. "Friend," he called out, "it is me. Do you remember? We practiced together. We made a promise to help each other. I have found a better place, a realm of beauty and peace. Come with me. Let me take you out of here." The worm stirred in the dung. Some distant memory flickered, but then it looked around at its surroundings and felt the familiar warmth, smelled the familiar smell, tasted the familiar taste. This was home. "Tell me about this realm of yours," the worm said. "It is wonderful," the friend replied. "The light is soft and golden. The air is sweet with fragrance. There is no hunger, no cold, no fear. Beings there live in harmony and joy. Is there any dung there?" the worm asked. The friend was taken aback. "Dung? No, of course not. It is a pure realm. There is no filth of any kind." The worm considered this. "No dung," it repeated. "Then where would I live? What would I eat? This dung is warm and soft. It nourishes me. It is everything I know. I think I will stay." The friend was distressed. "But you are suffering here. This is a low realm, a place of misery. You deserve better. You have the capacity for so much more. Please, let me help you." He reached down to lift his friend out of the dung. But the worm, sensing what was happening, wriggled and squirmed. The dung was slippery, and the worm knew every crevice, every hiding place. Each time the friend managed to lift it slightly, the worm escaped and burrowed back into the pile. Again and again the friend tried. His love for his companion gave him patience and persistence. But the worm did not want to be saved. The worm had come to love its prison. The dung was not suffering to the worm. It was home, food, identity, everything. Finally, exhausted and heartbroken, the friend had to withdraw. He returned to his realm of light, leaving the worm in its pile of dung. Not because he had stopped caring, but because he could not force freedom on someone who did not want it. This story is not really about afterlife realms or the fate of those who waste their opportunities. It is about something much more immediate. It is about the way we cling to our familiar sufferings, even when liberation is offered to us. We all have our piles of dung. We all have the dark, warm, familiar places where we burrow when life becomes challenging. For some, it is resentment, the endless replaying of old wounds, the nursing of grievances, the bitter satisfaction of being wronged. For others, it is self-pity, the identity of the victim, the one to whom bad things happen, the one who cannot catch a break. For still others, it is anxiety, the constant scanning for threats, the catastrophic thinking, the strange comfort of always being prepared for the worst. These mental habits are like dung to the worm. They may not look appealing from the outside. Anyone observing our patterns might wonder why we persist in them. But from the inside, they feel like home. They are warm. They are familiar. They are what we know. And when someone offers us a way out, when a friend or a teacher or a book or a moment of insight shows us that another way is possible, we often respond like the worm. We wriggle and squirm. We find reasons why the alternative will not work for us. We burrow back into what we know. Is there any dung there? We ask. Meaning, will I still be able to hold on to my grievances? Will I still be able to feel sorry for myself? Will I still have my familiar anxieties to keep me company? And when we learn that the realm of peace requires us to let go of these things, we hesitate. We are not sure we want to go somewhere so unfamiliar. This is the human condition. This is why wisdom teachings exist. Not because the truth is hidden or complicated, but because we resist it. We prefer our familiar suffering to unfamiliar freedom. We would rather be a worm in a pile we know than a being of light in a realm we do not. There is another story that illustrates the same truth in a different way. A teacher was once invited to speak at a gathering for those who had experienced loss. The room was full of people who had lost spouses, children, parents, friends. They had come together to support each other and to learn how to carry their grief. The teacher spoke about the nature of loss and the possibility of healing. He talked about how we can honor those we have lost while also allowing ourselves to move forward. He spoke of the difference between healthy grieving, which flows and eventually softens, and unhealthy grieving, which becomes stuck and hardens into a permanent identity. He offered practices for releasing pain and reconnecting with joy. After the talk, a woman approached him. She was visibly upset. "Are you saying I should not grieve?" she demanded. "Are you saying it is wrong to feel sorrow for my loss? You are trying to take away my grief." The teacher looked at her with compassion. He could see the years of pain etched into her face. He could sense how deeply she had merged with her identity as a grieving person. "I am not saying grief is wrong," he replied gently. "Grief is natural. Grief is love with nowhere to go. But I am wondering if perhaps grief has become something more for you than a natural response to loss. I am wondering if it has become who you are." The woman's eyes flashed. "Of course it is who I am. I lost my child. That changed me forever. I will never be the same. How dare you suggest I should just get over it?" The teacher nodded. "You are right that you will never be the same. Loss changes us. But there is a difference between being changed by loss and being defined by it. There is a difference between carrying grief as part of your story and making grief the whole story. You have the right to your sorrow. But you also have the right to moments of joy, to laughter, to peace. Those do not dishonor your loss. They honor your life." But the woman could not hear him. She had lived in her grief for so long that it had become her home, her identity, her purpose. She attended gatherings like this one not to heal, but to reinforce her position. Her community was other grieving people. Her conversations were about loss. Her entire life had organized itself around her tragedy. To let go of grief would feel like letting go of her connection to the one she had lost. it would feel like a betrayal. And so she clung to her pain as if it were precious, because in a strange way, it was. It was all she had left. The teacher watched her walk away, his heart heavy with compassion. He knew he could not force her to release what she was not ready to release. He knew that the door to freedom cannot be opened from the outside. He could only point to the door and hope that someday, when she was ready, she would walk through. Why do we cling to what hurts us? Why do we water the weeds when we know that flowers exist? The Buddha examined this question deeply, and his answer was both simple and profound. We cling because we believe that what we cling to is ourselves. We have constructed an identity out of our experiences, our stories, our patterns of thought and feeling. And when something threatens that identity, even if that something is liberation itself, we resist. We would rather be a suffering self than face the groundlessness of no fixed self at all. This is the deep root of all attachment, the belief that there is a solid, permanent me that must be protected and maintained. From this belief comes the grasping after pleasant experience, the aversion to unpleasant experience, and the strange attachment to familiar suffering that we have been discussing. The woman at the grief gathering was not simply grieving her lost child. She was grieving the loss of her identity as a mother, as a certain kind of person, as someone whose life made sense. The grief had become a way of preserving some connection to who she used to be. Letting go of the grief felt like letting go of herself. The worm in the dung was not simply attached to warmth and nourishment. It was attached to the only self it knew, the self that had formed in that pile. To leave would mean becoming something else, something unknown. And the unknown, even when it is beautiful, can be more frightening than the known, even when the known is painful. This is why true spiritual practice is not merely about feeling better or thinking positively. It is about examining the very root of suffering, the belief in a fixed self that must be defended at all costs. When this belief is seen through, when we recognize that the self is not a solid thing but a fluid process, then attachment naturally loosens. We no longer need to cling to our suffering because we no longer need to cling to any fixed identity at all. But this is deep work. It takes time and practice and patience. In the meantime, there are simpler steps we can take, gentler practices that begin to loosen the grip of our habitual patterns. The practice, at its most basic level, is simply this: notice what you are watering and make a conscious choice. When you catch yourself dwelling on a resentment, replaying an old argument, nursing a grievance, pause. Notice that you are watering a weed. You do not have to fight the thought or push it away. Simply notice and then gently redirect your attention. Ask yourself, is there a flower here that I could water instead? Perhaps you could remember a kindness you received recently. Perhaps you could bring to mind something you are grateful for. Perhaps you could simply feel your breath moving in your body, that basic affirmation of life that is always available. Any of these is a way of watering a different seed. At first, this practice will feel artificial. The mind will want to return to its familiar patterns. The weeds have deep roots, and they call out for water. But each time you redirect your attention, you weaken those roots slightly and strengthen the flowers slightly. Over time, the balance shifts. The garden changes. This is not about suppressing negative thoughts or pretending that everything is fine. It is about recognizing that you have a choice about where your attention goes. The resentment may arise, but you do not have to invite it to stay for dinner. The self-pity may knock at the door, but you do not have to offer it a room. You can acknowledge these visitors and then turn your attention elsewhere. The Buddha called this wise attention. It is the recognition that attention is not passive. Where we place our attention shapes our mind, our mood, our character, and ultimately our life. We are all gardeners, whether we know it or not. The question is whether we will garden consciously or let the garden grow wild. There is one more thing to say about the worm and the dung, about the woman and her grief, about all of us and our familiar sufferings. Leaving is not easy. It requires courage. It requires a willingness to face the unknown. It requires trust that what awaits us outside our prison is better than what we have inside, even though we cannot be certain of this in advance. The worm did not have this courage, but courage can be cultivated, just like any other quality. It grows when we take small steps outside our comfort zone and discover that we survive. It grows when we see others who have made the journey and are flourishing on the other side. It grows when we connect with something larger than our small, defended self and recognize that we are held by forces greater than our fears. The friend who came to rescue the worm could not provide this courage for his companion. No one can. The door to freedom opens from the inside, but we can support each other. We can remind each other that the door exists. We can share our own stories of leaving familiar suffering behind. We can model what is possible. There is a teaching in the Buddhist tradition about spiritual friends, those who walk the path alongside us and help us see what we cannot see alone. We need these friends. We need people who will gently point out when we are burrowing back into our familiar pile, when we are watering weeds while complaining about the state of our garden. We need witnesses to our journey who can remind us, when we forget, that we have already taken steps toward freedom and that more steps are possible. Sometimes a book can be such a friend. Sometimes a teaching heard at the right moment can open a door we did not know existed. Sometimes even a stranger's kindness can remind us that the realm of light is real and that we do not have to remain in darkness. But ultimately, the choice is ours. No one can want freedom for us more than we want it for ourselves. No one can do the work of leaving on our behalf. The invitation is always extended, but we must accept it. We must take the step. And we can start, each of us, with whatever small step we are capable of today. Perhaps it is simply noticing, for the first time, that we have been watering weeds. Perhaps it is recognizing one pattern of thought that does not serve us. Perhaps it is choosing, just once, to redirect our attention towards something more nourishing. Perhaps it is reaching out to a friend and admitting that we have been stuck, that we need help seeing a way forward. Each small step matters. Each choice to water a flower instead of a weed changes the garden slightly. And over time, these small changes accumulate into transformation. One day, we look around and realize that the garden has changed. There are still weeds. Perhaps there always will be, but they no longer dominate. The flowers have grown strong. Beauty has taken root. The realm of light is not somewhere else. It is not reserved for those who have died and been judged worthy. It is available here, now, in this very life. But we must be willing to leave the pile of dung. We must be willing to let go of what we know in order to discover what we might become. This is the invitation. This is the challenge. This is the path. What will you water today? Take a moment now to rest. Perhaps close your eyes and bring to mind your inner garden. Without judgment, simply notice what has been receiving your attention lately. What seeds have you been watering? And what seeds, perhaps, have been waiting patiently for nourishment that has not yet come? There is no need to change anything right now. Simply notice. Awareness itself is the beginning of change. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have learned to tend the garden of the mind. We have seen how attention nourishes whatever it touches, how we can choose to water flowers instead of weeds, and how even the most entrenched patterns of suffering can be transformed through conscious cultivation. We have begun to understand that the mind is not fixed but fluid, always responding to the quality of care it receives. But there is one more garden that requires our attention. One more place where beauty waits to be discovered, perhaps the most important place of all. And it is, for most people, the hardest place to look. It is the garden of the self. We have spoken of seeing the light in others, of perceiving goodness in those whom society has judged and dismissed. We have acknowledged that this is challenging work, requiring patience and the willingness to look beyond surface appearances. But there is something even more challenging, something that most people find almost impossible. Can you see your own light? Can you look at yourself with the same generous attention you might offer to a hillside at dawn and perceive the beauty that is there? Can you slow down and truly see yourself, allowing the full picture to form, rather than glancing quickly and moving on to criticism? For most people, the answer is no. Most people, when they look at themselves, see primarily what is wrong. They see their failures, their inadequacies, their mistakes. They see the 2 bad bricks and miss the 998 good ones. They live with a persistent sense that they are not enough, that something fundamental is flawed, that they must constantly strive to become acceptable. This is one of the great sorrows of human existence. We walk through life carrying a distorted mirror, one that magnifies our faults and minimizes our virtues. We believe what this mirror shows us. We take its distortions for truth, and we suffer accordingly. The Buddha spoke of this when he described the ways we create suffering for ourselves. One of the deepest sources of suffering, he taught, is the wrong view we hold about our own nature. We believe ourselves to be small, separate, and fundamentally flawed. We do not see our connection to all life. We do not recognize the vastness of our true nature. We are like waves who have forgotten they are the ocean. This forgetting is not a moral failure. It is not something to be ashamed of. It is simply the human condition, the veil that descends when we take birth in a body and begin to construct a sense of separate self. But it is a veil, not a wall. It can be seen through. And when it is, what we discover about ourselves is not the smallness we feared, but a beauty beyond imagination. There is a monk who has spent many years listening to people. In temples and community centers, in hospitals and homes, in formal meetings and chance encounters, thousands of people have shared their struggles with him. And in all those years, across all those conversations, he noticed something striking. Almost no one felt at peace with themselves. It did not matter whether they were wealthy or poor, successful or struggling, admired or unknown. It did not matter whether their lives, from the outside, appeared blessed or burdened. Inside, almost everyone carried the same secret conviction: something is wrong with me. The successful ones felt like frauds, waiting to be exposed. The admired ones felt unworthy of admiration. The loved ones could not quite believe they deserved love. Even those who presented confident faces to the world often revealed, in private moments, a gnawing sense of inadequacy that nothing seemed to heal. This is not a problem of individuals. This is an epidemic. It spans cultures and continents, ages and backgrounds. It affects the young who have not yet had time to fail, and the old who have had decades to accumulate evidence of their worth. It persists despite achievements, despite praise, despite all the external markers of value that our society provides. Where does it come from, this universal wound? How did we all learn to see ourselves so harshly? Part of the answer lies in how we were raised. From our earliest years, most of us were trained to notice our mistakes. When we did something wrong, attention was paid. Adults corrected us, sometimes gently, sometimes not. The message was clear: errors matter. Errors must be identified and fixed. This was meant to help us learn and grow, and in some ways it did. But it also taught us to scan constantly for what was wrong with us, to be hypervigilant about our faults. Meanwhile, when we did something right, the response was often muted. Good behavior was expected, not celebrated. Kindness was normal, not noteworthy. The message, unintentional but powerful, was that our positive qualities were merely baseline, while our negative qualities were significant. We learned to take our goodness for granted and to take our faults seriously. Year after year, this training accumulated. We became experts at self-criticism and amateurs at self-appreciation. We developed an inner voice that could catalogue our failures with precision but stumbled when asked to name our strengths. We built an identity around what was wrong with us and forgot to include what was right. There was also a cultural message, sometimes spoken and sometimes simply absorbed from the atmosphere, that self-appreciation was dangerous. We were taught that acknowledging our own goodness would lead to arrogance, that the proper posture was one of constant humility, which somehow came to mean constant self-diminishment. Do not get a big head, we were told. Do not think too highly of yourself. The implication was clear. The safe position was to think lowly of yourself, to always assume you could be better, to never rest in satisfaction with who you were. This message was well-intentioned. Those who transmitted it were trying to protect us from the unpleasantness of egotism. But the medicine became a poison when taken in too large a dose. We learned not just to avoid arrogance, but to avoid any positive self-perception at all. We learned that seeing our own beauty was somehow shameful, a sign of moral weakness, something to be hidden even from ourselves. And then, as adults, we wondered why we felt so inadequate. We wondered why no achievement ever felt like enough, why each success led not to satisfaction, but to the anxious question of what we must accomplish next. We wondered why we could not simply relax and accept ourselves as we were, why peace always seemed to require one more improvement, one more milestone, one more proof that we deserved to exist. The answer was hidden in plain sight. We had been trained to see ourselves through a distorted lens, and we had never thought to question the training. There is a story that illustrates this beautifully. Each year, in a certain community, there is a ceremony to honor those who have given extraordinary service to others. These are not celebrities or public figures. These are ordinary people who have done extraordinary things, often for decades, without seeking recognition or reward. Teachers who stayed late for struggling students. Volunteers who showed up week after week to help those in need. Neighbors who quietly cared for the elderly and the sick. People who saw a need and filled it, simply because it was right. A monk was once invited to attend this ceremony. He went expecting to be inspired by the generosity of these honorees, and he was. But he was also struck by something unexpected. One by one, the honorees were called forward to receive their recognition. One by one, they stood before the gathered community while their contributions were described. And one by one, something curious happened. They deflected the praise. "I really do not deserve this," said one woman who had spent 30 years serving her community. "There are so many others who have done more than I have. I was just doing what anyone would do." "This is too much," said a man who had helped hundreds of families through difficult times. "I am not special. I just showed up." "I do not know why you are giving this to me," said another, looking uncomfortable. "There are people in my own organization who work harder than I do. They should be standing here, not me." The monk watched this with a mixture of admiration and sadness. These were genuinely humble people. They were not performing modesty for the crowd. They truly could not see their own value. They had given gifts beyond measure, had changed lives, had made their corner of the world significantly better, and they could not accept that this was worthy of recognition. He recognized himself in their discomfort. He too struggled to receive praise. He too deflected compliments and minimized accomplishments. He too looked at himself and saw primarily what was lacking rather than what was present. And he wondered, what would it take to change this? What would it take to look at oneself with the same generous eyes one might use for a beloved friend? What would it take to see the whole wall, not just the two crooked bricks? There is a fear that keeps many people from acknowledging their own goodness. It is a fear so deep that most people do not even know they have it. But it shapes their self-perception profoundly. The fear is this: if I acknowledge my positive qualities, I will become arrogant. We have all met arrogant people. We know how unpleasant they are, how they dominate conversations and dismiss others, how they seem to believe they are better than everyone around them. We do not want to be like that, and so we hold ourselves in check. We push down any recognition of our own value, lest it grow into the monster of pride. This fear is understandable but misguided. It confuses two very different things. Arrogance does not come from seeing your goodness clearly. Arrogance comes from not seeing it clearly enough. The arrogant person is actually deeply insecure. They boast and preen because they are trying to convince themselves, as much as anyone else, that they have worth. Their inflated self-presentation is a defense against an underlying sense of emptiness. If they truly knew their own value, they would have no need to advertise it. When you genuinely see your own goodness, something very different happens. You do not become puffed up with pride. You become soft with gratitude. You recognize that your positive qualities are not achievements to boast about, but gifts to be thankful for. You see that your capacities arose from countless conditions: the love you received, the teachers who guided you, the opportunities that came your way, the very fact of being born human, with a mind capable of growth. None of this was your doing. All of it was grace. This recognition does not make you feel superior to others. It makes you feel connected to others. If your goodness arose from conditions, then so did theirs. If you have gifts, so do they. The clear seeing of your own value naturally extends to the clear seeing of everyone's value. You become not big-headed but big-hearted. The Buddha taught that genuine self-respect and respect for others arise together. You cannot truly have one without the other. When you see yourself clearly, you see the same nature in everyone. When you honor yourself, you naturally honor all beings. This is not arrogance. This is wisdom. How, then, do we begin to see ourselves more clearly? How do we clean the distorted mirror and perceive what is actually there? One powerful practice is simply to receive praise. This sounds easy, but for most people, it is remarkably difficult. When someone offers a compliment, the habitual response is to deflect it. Oh, it was nothing. Anyone would have done the same. I was just lucky. These responses feel humble, but they are actually a form of rejection. They reject the gift the other person is trying to give. They reject the perception the other person is trying to share. And they reinforce the internal belief that we are not worthy of appreciation. The practice is to receive the compliment fully. When someone says, "You did a wonderful job," the practice is to say, simply, "Thank you." Not to argue, not to minimize, not to redirect the praise elsewhere, just to receive it, like receiving a gift, with gratitude. This feels uncomfortable at first. The inner voice protests. But I did not do a wonderful job. There were so many flaws. They do not know the truth. Let this voice speak and then let it go. You do not have to believe the praise completely. You do not have to suddenly see yourself as perfect. You only have to allow the possibility that someone else sees something in you that you have been unable to see in yourself. Over time, this practice begins to erode the automatic self-rejection. You start to consider that perhaps the people who appreciate you are not deluded. Perhaps they are seeing something real. Perhaps their perception is more accurate than your own harsh self-assessment. And as you open to this possibility, something shifts. The mirror begins to clear. You catch glimpses of yourself that are not dominated by your faults. You begin to see, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence, that you are more than your mistakes, that you have contributed something of value, that you deserve, like everyone else, to be seen with kindness. This practice extends beyond receiving compliments from others. You can also practice giving compliments to yourself. At the end of each day, you might recall one thing you did well. Just one thing. Not to build your ego, not to compare yourself favorably to others, but simply to balance the ledger. Your mind has likely spent the day noticing your shortcomings. Now, consciously, deliberately, notice something you did right. Perhaps you were patient with someone who tested your patience. Perhaps you completed a task you had been avoiding. Perhaps you simply got through a difficult day without making things worse. Whatever it was, acknowledge it. Let yourself feel, just for a moment, that you did something well. This small practice, repeated daily, begins to rewire the habit of self-perception. It does not make you arrogant. It makes you accurate. It restores the balance that years of negative training have distorted. Imagine, for a moment, that you could see yourself through the eyes of someone who truly loves you. Not someone who is blind to your faults, but someone who sees your faults and loves you anyway. Someone who knows your struggles, your failures, your secret shames, and still perceives something beautiful in you. What would you see through those eyes? You would see a being who has faced difficulties with courage, even when the courage was invisible to everyone, including yourself. You would see someone who has gotten back up after being knocked down, who has continued to try when trying was hard, who has not given up on life, even when life gave ample reasons for despair. You would see a being capable of love. You would see the times you reached out to others, the kindnesses you offered without expectation of return, the moments when you chose compassion over indifference. You would see how these moments affected others, rippling outward in ways you never tracked, touching lives you never knew. You would see a being of tremendous sensitivity. You would see how deeply you feel, how much you care, how the suffering of others moves you. You would see that the very vulnerability that sometimes feels like weakness is actually a form of openness to life, a willingness to be touched by the world. You would see a being on a journey, not a finished product, not a perfect specimen, but a work in progress. You would see the growth that has already happened and the growth that is still possible. You would see that your mistakes, rather than defining you, have been teachers. That your failures, rather than proving your unworthiness, have carved out space for wisdom. You would see your sincerity. However imperfectly you have lived, you have tried. You have wanted to do well, to be good, to contribute something meaningful. This wanting itself is beautiful. It is the seed of all virtue, the root of all growth. Even when you have fallen short, the aspiration remained. Even in your darkest moments, some part of you was reaching toward the light. You would see your resilience. Life has challenged you in ways that others may never know. You have faced fears, weathered losses, endured disappointments, and you are still here, still reading, still seeking, still open to the possibility of change. This persistence is not nothing. It is everything. It is the quiet heroism of continuing when continuing is hard. This is what those who love you see. This is what you would see if the mirror were clean. Not a flawless being, but a beautiful one. Not someone without faults, but someone whose faults are held in a larger context of goodness. Not an arrival, but a journey worth taking. The Buddha taught many forms of compassion. Compassion for those who suffer. Compassion for those who cause harm out of their own confusion. Compassion for all beings without exception. But perhaps the most difficult form of compassion is the one we are discussing now, compassion for oneself. It seems like it should be easy. After all, we are always with ourselves. We know our own struggles from the inside. We have direct access to our own pain. But somehow, for most people, self-compassion is harder than compassion for others. We can look at a friend who has made a mistake and feel tenderness for their struggle. We can see how they were doing their best with the understanding they had. We can forgive them easily and encourage them to forgive themselves. But when we make the same mistake, the tenderness evaporates. We judge ourselves harshly, hold ourselves to impossible standards, and refuse ourselves the forgiveness we would offer anyone else. This is a strange cruelty, one we inflict on ourselves, without thinking. And it does not help. It does not make us better people. It does not motivate us to improve. It only adds suffering to suffering, piling shame on top of whatever original pain we experienced. The practice of self-compassion is the practice of offering yourself the same kindness you would offer a good friend. When you are struggling, instead of criticizing yourself for struggling, you acknowledge the difficulty. This is hard. This is a moment of suffering. When you make a mistake, instead of attacking yourself for making it, you recognize your humanity. Everyone makes mistakes. This is part of being human. When you fall short of your own standards, instead of concluding that you are worthless, you encourage yourself to try again. I am doing my best. I can learn from this. These simple phrases, spoken silently to yourself in moments of difficulty, begin to change the inner landscape. They water the flowers of self-acceptance instead of the weeds of self-hatred. They clean the mirror, slowly, one moment at a time. There is a traditional meditation practice in which you extend wishes of well-being to yourself and others. It begins with yourself. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be at peace. Only after generating genuine goodwill toward yourself do you extend it outward to others. This sequence is deliberate. It recognizes that self-compassion is the foundation from which compassion for others naturally flows. If you cannot wish yourself well, your wishes for others will always be incomplete. When you begin to see yourself clearly, when the distorted mirror begins to clean and your genuine beauty becomes visible, something remarkable happens. The parts of you that you have been fighting begin to relax. The constant inner battle quiets. The energy that was going into self-criticism becomes available for other things. You become more creative because you are no longer afraid of making mistakes. You become more generous because you are no longer trying to earn your worth through giving. You become more present because you are no longer running from the shame of the past or anxious about the judgment of the future. You become, quite simply, more yourself. There is a lightness that comes with self-acceptance, a humor about your own foibles, a gentleness with your own struggles. You can acknowledge that you are a work in progress without feeling that this diminishes your value. You can see your faults clearly without being devastated by them. You can hold the fullness of who you are, the light and the shadow together, with equanimity and even with love. This is what the Buddha called liberation. Not an escape from life, but a full arrival in it. Not the destruction of the self, but the releasing of the false self that was constructed from misperception. When you stop believing you are small and flawed, you discover what you always were, vast, luminous, and free. This discovery does not happen all at once. It unfolds gradually, like a flower opening. There are setbacks and reversals. Old habits of self-criticism reassert themselves. The distorted mirror sometimes seems as powerful as ever. But the direction is clear, and each moment of genuine self-seeing strengthens the capacity for more. The ancient teachers compared this process to polishing a mirror that has been covered with dust. Each moment of clear seeing is like a stroke of the cloth, removing a bit of the accumulated obscuration. At first, the results seem negligible. The dust is thick, and the mirror remains clouded. But with persistence, with patient repetition, the mirror gradually clears. And one day, looking into it, you see not a distorted image, but your true face. The journey is not about becoming something you are not. It is about uncovering what you have always been. The beauty was never absent. It was only obscured, like the sun behind clouds. The practice is simply to let the clouds part, again and again, until the sun becomes undeniable. You are not here to prove your worth. Your worth is not in question. You are not here to earn the right to exist. That right was given with your first breath. You are here to discover what you already are, to express what you already have, to share the gifts that were planted in you before you had any say in the matter. This discovery is not selfish. It is the most generous thing you can do. When you recognize your own beauty, you have more beauty to offer others. When you see your own light, you become a source of light for everyone around you. When you stop rejecting yourself, you stop unconsciously rejecting others. The world needs you to see yourself clearly. The world needs the gifts that only you can give. The world is waiting for you to stop hiding your light and start shining. Take a moment now to rest in stillness. Perhaps place a hand on your heart and feel its beating, this rhythm that has sustained you since before you were born. Consider offering yourself the simple wish, may I see myself clearly. May I recognize my own goodness. May I be at peace with who I am. There is no need to force belief. Simply allow the wish to be present, like a seed planted in fertile soil. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have traveled far together. We have learned to see beauty in landscapes and richness in our senses. We have discovered how to perceive the light in others and, most challengingly, in ourselves. We have understood that the mind is a garden and that what we water grows. We have begun the practice of tending that garden with wisdom and care. But there is one more teaching to explore, one more truth that must be understood if we are to navigate life with genuine peace. It is the truth about winter. There are times in every life when everything seems to die. Times when loss accumulates beyond bearing. Times when the things we counted on crumble, when the people we loved leave or are taken, when the plans we made dissolve into nothing. Times when we look around and see only barrenness, only cold, only the skeleton shapes of trees that once held leaves. These winters come to everyone. They may wear different faces. For some, it is the death of a loved one. For others, the end of a relationship, the loss of health, the collapse of a career. For still others, it is a more subtle winter, a gradual dimming of hope, a slow erosion of meaning, a creeping sense that life has become grey and will never again hold color. When we are in such winters, it can feel as though spring will never come. The cold is so pervasive, the landscape so bleak, that we cannot imagine warmth returning. We forget that we have seen seasons change before. We forget that winter is not permanent. We know, intellectually, that spring always follows winter, but the knowledge feels abstract and unhelpful. The winter we are in right now seems different. This winter, we fear, may last forever. This is where the deepest practice of stillness becomes essential. Not as an escape from winter, not as a denial of the cold, but as a way of seeing what winter truly is and what it contains. There is a memory that returns to some who grew up in places where winters were harsh. The memory of walking through a forest in the depths of the cold season. Snow covered everything. The trees were bare, their branches like black lines drawn against a grey sky. No birds sang, No insects hummed. The streams were frozen. The ground was hard, and the whole world seemed to have stopped. To a child walking through such a forest, it could seem as though everything had died, as though life itself had withdrawn from the world, leaving only this cold, silent emptiness. The forest that had been so full of color and movement in summer was now a place of stillness and apparent death. But a wise adult walking alongside that child might pause and point to something. Beneath the snow, they might say, the ground is not empty. It is full of seeds. Millions upon millions of seeds, fallen from trees and flowers, carried by wind and water, buried now beneath the white blanket. These seeds are not dead. They are sleeping. They are waiting. And it is not only seeds. Beneath the frozen soil, roots are resting. The same roots that fed the flowers of spring and the leaves of summer are still there, alive, conserving their energy for the season of growth that will surely come. In hollow trees and underground burrows, animals are sleeping too, their bodies slowed to almost nothing, dreaming whatever animals dream until warmth returns. The forest that seems dead is actually full of life. It is life in a different form, life in waiting, life in potential. The winter is not an ending. It is a pause, a gathering of strength, a preparation for what is to come. This is true of forests, and it is true of lives. The Buddha taught extensively about impermanence. All conditioned things arise and pass away, he said. Nothing that has a beginning can avoid having an end. This teaching is sometimes heard as pessimistic, as though it were saying that everything good will be taken from us, that attachment to anything is foolish because loss is inevitable. But there is another way to hear this teaching. If all things pass away, then winters pass away too. If nothing is permanent, then suffering is not permanent either. The very impermanence that takes our joys also takes our sorrows. The same turning wheel that carries us into darkness carries us out again. This is the wisdom of cycles. Day follows night follows day. Summer follows, winter follows summer. Birth follows, death follows birth. Nothing remains stuck forever. Nothing is truly static, no matter how frozen it appears. The wheel is always turning, even when we cannot perceive its movement. The ancient teachers understood this deeply. They watched the natural world and saw reflected in it the patterns of human experience. They saw that the farmer who panics in winter, who digs up his fields searching for the seeds he planted, only destroys what was waiting to grow. They saw that the one who trusts the cycle, who allows winter its time and tends the soil when spring arrives, reaps abundant harvests. They taught that our minds work the same way. There are seasons of growth and seasons of rest. Seasons of outward activity and seasons of inward consolidation. Seasons of joy and seasons of sorrow. Each has its purpose. Each contributes something essential to the whole. To reject any season is to reject life itself. When we are in a winter of the soul, this wisdom can be a lifeline. Not a denial of the cold we feel, but a reminder that cold is not the whole story. Somewhere, beneath the frozen surface of our current experience, seeds are waiting. Forces are gathering. Spring is preparing itself, even now, even in the darkest and coldest moment. We have seen winters before, even if we have forgotten. We have seen what seemed like endings reveal themselves as transitions. We have watched the bare branches of our lives put forth new leaves when we had given up hope of green. The wheel has turned before. It will turn again. This is not optimism, which is merely hoping that things will be better. This is something deeper, the recognition of a pattern that has held true throughout all of existence. Seasons change. Cycles complete themselves. What goes down comes up. What dies is reborn. The question is not whether spring will come. The question is how we will meet the winter while we wait. There is a way to meet winter that transforms it from mere endurance into something more. It requires a shift in perspective, a willingness to see the cold season not as punishment or failure, but as invitation. Winter invites us to stop. In the seasons of growth and activity, there is always more to do. More to accomplish, more to pursue, more to tend. The energy of spring and summer pushes us outward into engagement with the world. This is natural and good, but it is not sustainable without rest. Even the earth cannot produce continuously. Even the most fertile soil needs time to lie fallow. Winter provides this time. When external conditions make activity difficult, when the usual pursuits are blocked, when life seems to have pressed a pause button we did not choose, we are being given something. We are being given the opportunity to stop. For those of us trained to constant productivity, this can feel like failure. We should be doing something, we think. We should be fixing the problem, pushing through, making progress. To simply stop feels like giving up. But consider what happens in the natural world during winter. The trees are not failing to grow. They are consolidating. They are sending their energy downward, into their roots, strengthening their foundation for the growth to come. The seeds are not failing to sprout. They are waiting for conditions that will support their unfolding. The animals are not failing to hunt. They are conserving, resting, allowing their bodies to restore themselves. What if we could meet our own winters with this same wisdom? What if, instead of fighting the pause, we could embrace it? What if the stillness that winter imposes could become the stillness we have been learning to cultivate? This is where all our practice comes together. The ability to slow down and perceive beauty. The capacity to receive fully through our senses. The skill of seeing light in darkness, in others, and in ourselves. The practice of choosing what to water in the garden of the mind. All of these prepare us for winter. All of these allow us to meet the cold season, not with despair, but with presence. There is a story about a time when researchers set out to discover what actually helps people who are struggling with depression. This was not a small study. It was a rigorous investigation, comparing different approaches to see which ones truly made a difference. They looked at medication, the pills that millions of people take to alter their brain chemistry and lift their mood. They looked at various forms of therapy, the conversations with trained professionals designed to change thought patterns and behaviors. And they looked at meditation, the simple practice of sitting still and attending to the present moment. What they found surprised many people, though it would not have surprised the ancient teachers. Meditation was more effective than medication, more effective than therapy. The simple act of being still, of training the mind to rest in the present moment, produced better outcomes than the sophisticated interventions of modern medicine and psychology. This does not mean that medication and therapy are worthless. For some people, in some circumstances, they are essential and life-saving. But it does mean that we have underestimated something. We have underestimated the power that lies in stillness itself. When you meditate, you are not doing nothing. You are doing something profound. You are allowing the mind to rest from its constant activity. You are giving the nervous system a chance to down-regulate, to release the chronic tension of always being on alert. You are creating conditions in which the body can heal itself, in which the mind can sort through accumulated experience, in which wisdom can arise from the depths. This is what winter offers, if we can receive it. Not punishment, but medicine. Not deprivation, but restoration. The very stillness that seems so empty is actually full of healing potential, like the forest floor beneath the snow, like the seeds waiting in the frozen ground. The Buddha himself spent years in intense spiritual practice before his awakening, but the final breakthrough came not through effort but through release. He sat beneath a tree and simply stopped striving. He allowed his mind to settle, to become still, to rest in its natural state. And in that stillness, wisdom arose. In that stopping, he saw the truth of existence clearly for the first time. This pattern repeats itself throughout the contemplative traditions. The mystics of all faiths report that their deepest insights came not through thinking harder, but through thinking less. Not through doing more, but through finally allowing themselves to stop. The silence they entered was not empty. It was full, overflowing, pregnant with revelation. We do not need to become mystics to benefit from this principle. We do not need to sit in meditation for years, though such practice is valuable. We only need to recognize that stillness is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something. Something we desperately need and rarely receive. When life forces us to stop, when winter makes our usual activities impossible, we are being given a gift. It may not feel like a gift. It may feel like loss, like failure, like the cruelty of circumstances. But if we can shift our perception, if we can see the invitation hidden in the deprivation, everything changes. The winter that seemed to be taking something from us is actually offering something precious. It is offering us ourselves. How, practically, do we bring this understanding into our lives? How do we transform winter from something to be endured into something to be embraced? The first step is simply to stop fighting. When winter comes, when loss or difficulty or depression descends, our instinct is often to resist. We try to push through, to maintain our normal pace, to pretend that nothing has changed. This resistance exhausts us. It adds the suffering of struggle to the suffering of circumstance. Instead, we can acknowledge what is happening. We can say, to ourselves, and perhaps to trusted others, this is a winter. I am in a cold season. Things are difficult right now. This acknowledgement is not defeat. It is honesty. And from honesty, wise action becomes possible. The second step is to turn inward. Winter is a time for inner work. When external conditions do not support outward activity, we can direct our attention to the interior landscape. We can meditate more. We can reflect on our lives, on what matters, on what we want to carry forward and what we are ready to release. We can tend the roots of our being, even when no leaves are visible. The third step is to trust the cycle. This is perhaps the hardest, because when we are in winter, spring seems impossible. But we can remind ourselves of what we know. We can recall previous winters that ended, previous springs that came. We can hold the truth of impermanence not as a threat but as a promise. This too shall pass. This always passes. The wheel is always turning. The fourth step is to look for the hidden life. Even in the coldest winter, there are signs of what is waiting to emerge. Small moments of peace in the midst of difficulty. Unexpected kindnesses from others. Glimmers of insight that arise in the stillness. These are the seeds beneath the snow. They are evidence that life has not abandoned us, that spring is already preparing itself, that the frozen ground will one day soften and new growth will push through. There is a practice that can help with this. Each day, no matter how dark the winter, look for one small sign of life. It might be a moment of genuine connection with another person. It might be a memory that brings a faint smile. It might be the simple pleasure of warmth on a cold day, of food when hungry, of rest when tired. These small things are not trivial. They are evidence of spring. They are proof that life continues, that goodness persists, that not everything has frozen. When we deliberately look for these signs, we begin to find them everywhere. Not because we are fooling ourselves, not because we are denying the reality of winter, but because they were always there and we were simply too lost in our suffering to notice. The practice of looking for hidden life trains the mind in a different direction. It waters different seeds. It prepares us to recognize spring when it finally arrives in full force. There is a moment in late winter, for those who live in places where seasons change dramatically, when something shifts. The days begin to lengthen, almost imperceptibly at first. The light changes quality, becoming slightly warmer. The snow, so solid and permanent seeming, develops a different texture, a hint of softness at the edges. Nothing has bloomed yet. The trees are still bare. The ground is still cold. To a casual observer, winter is still fully in force. But those who are paying attention can sense something. A quickening, a stirring, life beginning to wake from its long sleep. This moment comes in the winters of our lives as well. Before the obvious signs of spring, before the new opportunities or relationships or sources of meaning become visible, there is this subtle shift, a lightening of the inner atmosphere, a loosening of the grip of despair, a whisper of possibility where before there was only resignation. These first hints of spring are easy to miss. They are quiet. They do not announce themselves. If we are still fighting winter, still resisting the cold, still lost in our stories of endless suffering, we will not notice them. But if we have learned to be still, to pay attention, to perceive what is subtle and easily overlooked, we will feel them. And that feeling can sustain us through the final stretches of cold. The Buddha taught that suffering has an end. This was not merely a hope he offered to comfort his followers. It was a truth he had verified through his own experience, and that countless practitioners have verified since. Suffering arises from causes. When the causes are addressed, the suffering ceases. This is not theory. This is the nature of things. The winters of our lives have ends. The springs that follow them are real, not metaphorical springs, not consolation prizes, but genuine renewals of life and hope and possibility. We cannot always see them coming. We cannot force them to arrive on our schedule, but we can trust that they are on their way, because they always have been, because this is how existence works. We have come to the end of our journey together. though of course the true journey continues for as long as we live. Let us pause here and gather what we have learned. We began with a question: how does one cultivate a positive mind? Not through force, we discovered, not through demanding that we feel what we do not feel, but through stillness, through slowing down enough to perceive what is actually here. We learned that beauty is everywhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for eyes that have time to see it. We learned that our senses are gateways to richness beyond imagination, if only we stop rushing past them. We learned that every person contains light, and that our perception of that light can help it grow. We learned that we ourselves contain light, and that seeing it clearly is not arrogance, but awakening. We learned that the mind is a garden, shaped by where we place our attention. We learned that we can choose what to water, and that this choice, made again and again, transforms who we become. We learned that even our familiar sufferings are not prisons unless we refuse to leave them. And now we have learned about winter. We have learned that the cold seasons of life are not punishments or endings, but pauses and preparations. We have learned that beneath the frozen surface, life is waiting. We have learned that spring always comes, because this is the nature of cycles, because impermanence is not only loss, but also renewal. All of these teachings point to the same truth. The positive mind we seek is not something we must manufacture. It is something we uncover. It is our natural state, obscured by speed and distraction and misperception, revealed by stillness and attention and the willingness to see clearly. The path is not complicated. Slow down. Be still. Pay attention. See what is actually here, not what your fears and judgments project onto it. Water the flowers. Let the weeds wither. Trust the cycle. Wait for spring, not passively, but with the active receptivity of one who knows that winter is not the whole story. This is the practice. This is the path. This is how a positive mind naturally arises, not as an achievement but as a discovery, not as something we create, but as something we finally allow. There is one more thing to say, one more teaching to offer before we part. The winters we have been discussing are external winters, winters of circumstance, winters that come and go with the conditions of our lives. But there is a place within us that is not touched by these winters, a place of perpetual warmth, perpetual light, perpetual spring. The Buddha called this place by many names: our true nature, the unconditioned, that which is not born and does not die. It is the awareness that witnesses all our experiences without being damaged by them. It is the stillness beneath all movement, the silence beneath all sound, the peace beneath all turbulence. This place is always accessible, though we rarely rest there. It is always available, though we usually overlook it. It does not depend on external conditions. It does not require that life go well. It is present in the depths of winter as fully as in the height of summer, because it is not subject to seasons at all. The practices we have been exploring are ultimately doorways to this place. When we slow down and perceive beauty, we touch it. When we receive fully through our senses, we approach it. When we see the light in others and ourselves, we recognize it. When we tend the garden of our minds with wisdom, we create conditions for it to reveal itself. And when we rest in this place, even briefly, even incompletely, we discover something astonishing. The positive mind we have been seeking is not something we will someday achieve. It is something we already are. It is our deepest nature, temporarily forgotten, eternally present, waiting only for our return. This is the final teaching. This is the deepest truth. You are not broken. You are not lacking. You are not far from peace. Peace is your very nature. It has never been absent. It cannot be destroyed. It waits for you now, as it has always waited, patient and luminous, the eternal spring at the heart of all things. Take a moment now to be completely still, not seeking anything, not trying to achieve anything, simply resting in this moment, exactly as it is. Notice that awareness is present. Notice that you are here, reading these words, breathing, existing. This awareness that notices is not troubled. It is not lacking. It is simply aware. Rest there, in that simple awareness, for as long as you wish. This is your true home. This is the eternal spring. When you are ready, when it feels right, you may continue on your way, carrying this stillness with you into whatever season awaits. We began with a frustration that nearly everyone has known. The impossible instruction to be positive when positivity feels utterly out of reach. The gap between knowing that attitude matters and actually being able to change our attitude. The quiet despair of feeling that even this simple thing is beyond our capacity. And now, having traveled together through these teachings, we arrive at a different place. We have discovered that the positive mind is not achieved through effort. It is revealed through stillness. It is not something we must create, but something we uncover, like clearing clouds to reveal a sun that was always shining. We have learned to slow down, to see, to receive. We have learned to perceive beauty in unexpected places and light in the most shadowed corners. We have learned that we ourselves are worthy of the same gentle seeing we offer to others. We have learned to tend the garden of our minds, to trust the turning of seasons, to wait for spring with patient confidence. None of this requires special circumstances. None of this depends on life going well. The practices we have explored are available in every moment, in every situation, in the midst of the busiest day and the darkest night. Stillness is always accessible. Attention can always be redirected. The choice of what to water is always ours. So we end where we began, but transformed by the journey. The instruction to be positive no longer frustrates us because we now know the path. We know that we need not force anything. We need only slow down, pay attention, and allow our natural state to emerge. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.